See?
You know, I'm a fellow scarf bonado. See what I did right there?
That's right. It was very well done. That's so cute. I love it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Likewise.
Bounce to the corner and it falls in for something.
It's the worst.
Nobody puts
I know.
Amy Alford in the corner except for Paul Levy.
Hit my knee on it.
Beautiful. All right.
This is one of those days where you're just like, it's a pretty it'd be lovely if we could just,
Yeah.
you know, when the students are all like, can we have class outside today?
Yeah, I haven't heard that one in person in a long time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I know.
Great. They were like frolicking in the golden sunlight as I left. It was beautiful. I thought like, you're like, what do you mean going to school meeting again? And it's like, oh, I need guys.
My other question is, when is the city council meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you should speak up.
We make a business like all I do is talk, so I don't know, we can find out from the city clerk what the agenda is for that.
I'm like, does anyone have any questions? Well, that was me.
Totally understand.
Tam,
I get that question.
were you like outside this weekend? I don't know. I got a whole lot of nothing to show for
Whatever,
it.
dude.
More sugar.
Like,
Yesterday than I think I had online.
He's a lovely person.
Mm-hmm. My mother-in-law did the same thing. She arrived with birthday cake flavored peeps today, and I was like, "Oh, this is what we needed."
Yeah.
My mom is actually pretty used to that. It's like a calling, I would say. Like the things that she, like,
Sure. Lovely to see you.
Yeah.
I warned her, so that she could find my cat.
she actually filled out this time
Which is which? Did you get any food? Hey, Richie, I have.
Same.
It's only about 500,000 of us.
I was deeply disturbed when my daughter, who was
Well,
that
Mr. Chair?
set off the witness.
Overlapping.
My word, what did you say?
What's going on?
Where you guys?
Yeah.
Maybe Brent sticks with you.
I know.
Like 5:30.
I knew that was a. But otherwise, you'd be all over.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. Check.
I liked my nobody puts Amy in the corner joke except for Paul Levy. That's good. That's good. Don't worry. Oh, good God.
plates.
It's nice.
Nope. All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the public hearing on the year 25 budget, which will be followed immediately by the start of a regularly scheduled school committee meeting. Given as a public hearing, we will entertain all speakers both in the room or virtually. So everyone who wishes to will have an opportunity to speak on the budget. With that, our first speaker of the evening is Lindsay Golden. And speakers will have 3 minutes. You will get a 30-second warning from Emily. And if you could please state your name and address for the record before you begin.
Sure. I'm Lindsay Golden. I live at 19 Garland Road. Thank you for entertaining my comment. So something that struck me as curious during the teachers' strike was that items that I would consider as part of a normal budgeting process for information gathering and prioritization were instead part of the teachers' negotiations. For instance, they were asking for things like adequate staffing of social workers to enable them to do their jobs, which got me thinking, how is it that we gather feedback from frontline educators who really know the state of the schools when we're making the budget? So I know you guys are reaching the end, but I wanted to make a request that going forward in the next budgeting cycle, that NPS makes public the structure of gathering feedback for budgets and explicitly explains how frontline educators are given input into the process and how the NPS administration weighs that and takes it into account, and specifically who is responsible for collecting feedback from each and every school and each and every grade, so that budgets in the future accommodate things like adequate social workers that wouldn't normally be part of a teacher's contract. Anyways, thank you for entertaining my comment. The end.
Thank you. Our next speaker this evening is Jo Louise Allen.
Thank you. My name is Jo Louise Allen. I live in 24 Indian Terrace in Upper Falls. Sure. They're very sticky. Okay, let me start again. Hi, I'm Jo Louise Allen. I live at 24 Indiana Terrace in Newton Upper Falls. And I would like to speak about the Harbor program and the recent budget presentation by the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services. I think, sorry, I know I only have 3 minutes. I'm not sure how many of you, I sent this at 5:25 p.m. thinking that the meeting was at 5:30. I sent a series of pictures of what is the beautiful harbor facility on the campus of Newton South High School. I think it's deplorable that there is a gorgeous building sitting there with 4 classrooms, 2 clean, beautiful bathrooms, mini splits for heating and air conditioning. And this program was eliminated last year. 1.5 FTE were removed, saying being assigned to other programs. Okay, here's my personal story. My youngest was in the Harbor program in the fall of 2018. And I have to tell you, if they did not get the unbelievable support and education and counseling in that program after a psychiatric hospitalization, they would have not graduated with their graduating class in June of 2019. And they would not have graduated summa cum laude from college in May of 2023. So I believe that whether you're on an IEP or not, we are in a post-pandemic, shocking, skyrocketing young people with suicide ideation, loneliness, anxiety, depression. And I believe the rates of hospitalization are also increased from pre-pandemic. So I really think that that's disingenuous to hear that $500,000 would be needed to build a school within a school, when you have a gorgeous building that I sent you pictures of that the janitor told me has been closed for like 11 months or 12 months. And it's absolutely gorgeous building. And I can tell you that when my youngest was there, they were Newton North and Newton South students. They took them once a week to a food pantry so the kids would learn about giving back to the community.
You have 30 seconds.
Okay. They had regular education, not special education. Fantastic. Leslie Quattrini from math, Mr. Youngman from music, someone else for English, someone else for history, science, came over to that program. So it offered a regular education program too, to young people coming out of the hospital. And my last comment would be that if my young adult didn't have that wraparound and counseling, they would have relapsed, they would have re-entered a hospital, and they would not have graduated with their class. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that is all the speakers that have signed up in the room. Lisa, there's no one else virtual? Okay. Do we need to vote to exit the public hearing? Yeah, okay. Is there a motion to adjourn the public hearing? Moved by Paul. Is there a second? Chief?
Second.
Any further discussion? And we'll do a roll call vote. Ward 1,
Yes.
Ward 2, yes. Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6.
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward 8,
Yes.
and Mayor Fuller.
Yes.
Okay, that is 9-0. We are adjourned for the public hearing, and we will now convene our regular school committee meeting, which will have its own public comment period. So with that, I see two of the speakers for the public hearing are on here. I'm not sure if that's intentional, but we'll, if it is, that's fine. You're certainly welcome to speak at both. And if not, you can just let us know when it's your turn. So with that, the first speaker tonight is Lindsay Golden. And just in case you're not aware, you have 3 minutes. Emily will give you a warning, and if you could please state your name for the record. Thank you.
Hi, folks. I'm still Lindsay Golden, and I still reside at 19 Garland Road. I'm coming to give the exact same public comment that I gave a month ago, which is that if 98% of our highly educated professionals, who typically are of the people pleaser variety, voted to go on strike, that meant something went drastically wrong in the negotiations. I'd like to congratulate and thank Committee Member Shen for leadership in standing up and saying that you as a body needed to do better. So a couple weeks ago, you said that. I acknowledged it. I thought that showed true leadership, and I thank you. What I would like to hear from the rest of you is specifically, very specifically, what you did, the decisions you made that you won't do again. So part of taking a responsibility and part of being accountable for your responsibility to the voters is to acknowledge what you did wrong, and something clearly went wrong in those negotiations because, again, 98% of highly educated professionals felt they had no other option than to engage in what is an unlawful strike. Those people are not lawbreakers, they're teachers. What was it? State this to the public, take responsibility so we know that it won't happen when the contract comes up again. Please do it, because I would like to stop making this public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Enrique Rosero.
Enrique Rosero, 19 Garland in Newton, Massachusetts. Committee members, how short is our memory? With groveling and praise to the mayor's Fuller's creativity, this budget was introduced a couple of weeks ago. You did wise, however, to remember that the only reason this committee isn't again discussing painful cuts like the past couple of years is because our
Recording in
educators and
progress.
community took a stand and demanded no more underfunding. Budgets are a statement of priorities and values. Looking for reasons behind those cuts, I found some answers in an editorial published in November 2023 by award-winning young journalist from Newton South's The Lion Roar, entitled An Open Letter to Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller. And I will share some excerpts from it, and I quote, Fuller publicly regards NPS to be in a state of excellence and that her work has been effective in effort and resource allocation. This is not true. Taking into account the fact that we are amidst contract negotiations, educators are far from the only unhappy recipients of Fuller's negligent treatment. Budget cuts resulting in unprecedented large class sizes, a decrease in available social emotional support programs, and unusable facilities necessary for sustaining basic human life are not going unnoticed by our students. Fuller continuously invests in large and ultimately superfluous gestures that feel more performative than contributive. If Fuller truly cared about the wellness of the district, she would attack true problems and make an impact on the issues students and NPS educators know are genuinely prevalent. But she won't do this because, to be frank, her interests do not lie in the well-being of public school youth, but in the elderly, her support base. Fuller's administration teaches us that phony and lackluster efforts are prevalent at all levels of government. Empty promises are one of the biggest fads in our modern era. Mayor Fuller, you are on top of that trend.
You have
End
30
quote.
seconds.
I've emailed you the entire text to help you refresh your memories. Hopefully you recognize and won't forget why the budget in front of you is not like those others in prior years. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the final speaker in the room tonight is Jo Louise Allen.
This is my encore
Hello again.
performance. Hello again. It's Jo Louise Allen, 24 Indiana Terrace, Newton Upper Falls, Massachusetts. I want to ask that you all think very seriously about your straw vote on the budget and then your final vote on the budget. And I think Dr. Nolan has done a stupendous job with the funds that she has been allocated. Mayor Fuller, thank you for setting up an educational stabilization fund, but yet it's pretty level funded. So please think seriously about what I just spoke about the harbor program. The building is there and it's gorgeous and it's empty. And to say that you need to build a school within a school, to me, very disingenuous. How quickly we forget. When my son was a junior, 2013 to 2014, we lost 5 young high school students to suicide. Not only did we have the terrible loss of those 5 high school students, my son and his peers, my son was in a homeroom, in a good friends with one of the young men that took his life. So you had a traumatic shock in the community and among the friends. Some friends really, you take it hard, obviously, but some of the friends of the young people that lost their lives were as equally traumatized. So I'm asking you to please think strongly before you do the straw vote. I know how limited funding is, but if you can see a 1.0, the Assistant Superintendent for Student Services spoke about 10 reserved positions that fluctuate based on new move-ins. based on new out of IEPs that are developed, I think you can spare one of those 10 or 1.5 of those 10 to restore harbor. And post, maybe I already said this in my first one, I'm sorry, but if pre-pandemic in 2013-14, we had 5 suicides, and this predated the Signs of Suicide program that was introduced to the high school to try to identify young people who may be on the brink.
You have 30 seconds.
Okay. And there was one other thing I was thinking, the signs of suicide. And anyway, yes, so those 5 suicides took place in 2013 to 14, almost 6 years before pandemic. And now we all know, you've heard statistics, you've had professionals speak. Post-pandemic, the numbers are skyrocketing. So, you know, I know how the budget is, as I said, thank you and thank you. But you have time before the final vote to ask that one position be
Your time is up.
restored. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That looks like everyone who has signed up for public comment. Lisa, is there anyone remote? Nope, there's no remote speakers. So that will close our public comment period, and we will move on to the superintendent's report.
So solely doubling down on the arts this evening, and just to thank our Director of K-8 Fine and Performing Arts, Richard King, for a beautiful celebration that happened here last week, where the halls were literally jam-packed with children and adults looking at art, talking about their careers as future artists, and walking through the different hallways, imagining who they could be when they go up to high school. So many moms sent me pictures of their child with the painting and with me and with each other. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful time period. There's a lot else going on in the district. MCAS testing, EL testing has wrapped for the year. But the arts performance really summed up for us just the power of connections with our teachers, the importance of the creative arts, and just how special these showcases are. So I just wanted to feature that in particular. And we have another meeting Thursday, so I'll have more to say then. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for the superintendent? Rajiv?
Just a request, Dr. Nolan, in meeting with a number of parents in Newton over the weekend, questions did come up around the high school seniors and where things stand right now in terms of AP tests and ensuring that everything has been that the high schools were supposed to send in for college admissions or is in the process of being submitted. Some of this was in the context of the FAFSA issues that have been in the news. But given that we were behind in a number of areas, it would be helpful in a future update just to understand where things
Thank
stand.
you. I will get that for you.
Okay. Thank you, Rajiv. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you, Dr. Nolan. We'll move on to the consent agenda, where we have 3 items this evening. The minutes of the special meeting on March 27th, the Student Opportunity Act plan, which we are required to vote on, and we discussed it at some length at our last meeting, and the out-of-state overnight field trip memo we've all been presented for students in Anaheim, it looks like. Is there anything a member would like to remove from the consent agenda for further discussion? Okay, seeing no comments, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion that we approve the consent agenda?
Moved by Tamika, is there a second? Second by Paul. Any further discussion? And we'll do a roll call vote. Ward 1.
Yes.
Ward 2 is yes. Ward 3.
Yes.
Ward 4.
Yes.
Ward 5.
Yes, and go Duck a team.
Ward 6.
Yes.
Ward 7.
Yes.
Ward 8.
Yes.
And Mayor Fuller.
Yes.
Okay, consent agenda passes 9-0. All right, next item on the agenda is a discussion of the for year 25 budget, which we have now had all of our departments present. Dr. Nolan, is there an introduction you'd like to give to this, or?
No, just to say that each small B budget portion has now been run through by each of you on subsequent meetings, just to recount for the public. We just had the public budget hearing, and to one of the speaker's points, we did discuss this quite at length during the negotiations as well. So a little bit, the horse was out of the barn earlier than the budget season, unlike other years. So I don't think there are a lot of surprises, but it is Mr. Hurley and my pleasure to answer any questions that may be lingering for you. You know, what ifs, other conversations. I think the only thing outstanding here is that you had mentioned wanting to hear more about, you know, make a decision as a group about busing and private school busing versus public. So I just want to say you can do that independent of the budget, since it's a cost neutral situation right now. So that was a question that came up earlier. I know there's some food service questions that came up that we should probably recreate. And I do know that at least one member wants to follow up on a couple of items. So I do think there are some outstanding possibilities for us to weigh. And remember our norms, that we're at our best when we play devil's advocate, right? So even if you have harmony with what we've put forward for the budget, we should probably poke and prod in very public ways as to how good is it.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, with that, would anyone like to share their thoughts?
Yes.
Paul, please.
Not
So nice to have you here tonight.
Thank you. Notwithstanding Dr. Nolan's suggestion of devil's advocacy, I actually want to reiterate the points that Tamika made when the budget was first presented, which is in part because we've gone through so many aspects of it in setting in reviewing the superintendent's entry plan and setting her objectives for the year in terms of the various issues that came up during the union negotiation. I think there's a remarkable confluence between the budget that's been presented and, if I can speak for us all, the general approach that we have been talking about for many months. And while there might always be some small items around the edges, I think it's a very good budget. It's thoughtful, it's consistent with all of the things we've been saying for so many months. And I want to thank the superintendent for putting it together and for her team for explaining it all. And I'd like to make a suggestion, Mr. Chairman, that we leave open the possibility in the public notice for the meeting on Thursday that instead of the straw vote, the final vote might be taken on Thursday. We don't need to decide that tonight, but I think for the sake of the public notice on Thursday, we have to leave open that possibility for there to be a final vote. So, and if there are a few minor items that need to be clarified, whether we do it tonight or on Thursday, I for one would be prepared to vote the final vote on Thursday night. My colleagues can all give their opinion on that, but I'd like to make sure we leave open that possibility for Thursday night's meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other comments, questions? Emily.
So I promised that I did not ask this question in conjunction with the speaker, or public speaker, Jill Louise Allen, but I did have a question that I know I got an answer to, and I appreciate that. Casey, the question that you answered my questions beautifully, but I think in light of the public comments, and also because I think it's just important to raise this issue, to raise it up, not necessarily because like my questions, I'll get to it. I'm a little all over the place. Sorry. It's been a long day. So it's about something that Casey mentioned during the superintendent's for student services discussion. And that was, whether or not there was a need for a stabilization program, particularly for students who are going to be possibly entering a hospitalization or transitioning back from a hospitalization. And so my questions were actually similar to some of the things that Joe Louise said, which was we cut the Harbor program last year as part of our fiscal year discussion, budget discussion. And so my question was, are we at this point now, because we had done cuts to the Harbor program at Newton South, and then also, what is the sense of urgency around serving these students? Are there a ton of them now that need supports? Is this something that we could possibly do or, shift or add if there was enough sense of urgency around it in this particular budget? And so I think, given the public comments, that I think it's a worthwhile to get the answers publicly stated, not just to me in an email, but just on the public record. So with that, Casey, I know I see you there. If you don't mind answering those questions, that'd be
Casey,
great.
would you mind, just for the public, the difference between the Harbor program and the actual Bright program, which is what we were discussing as potential future ads, and that we hope to explore in our mental health committee that is part of the side agreement, but that was just recently negotiated. I think there's some confusion about those programs, and could you tee us up on that?
Yeah, I actually appreciate the tee up. Forgive me as my kids are finishing dinner. And I also have two small dogs, so you might hear them growling. Apologies. So there is a difference between, I was describing a Bright program, which actually is the name of the type of program that I was describing. But folks, because they are the ones who spearheaded this kind of programming in public high schools, a lot of folks just call it a Bright program or a Bright model. So Harbor High was actually a 45-day assessment program. So these are for students for various reasons. Were experiencing difficulties in the bigger buildings and required a different setting to be assessed by a school psychologist, a counselor, whatever the need was. Students were being assessed. And then following the 45-day placement at Harbor High, there would be a recommendation made for either smaller programming or different supports or more supports at the high schools. Now, a Bright program is a therapeutic milieu where it is it's an in-school program. Ideally, it's in school for students who are transitioning either to or from hospitalization. So two very, very different populations served in these two different programs. To your questions, Emily, about the need, there's certainly need because we're seeing more students who require a higher level of care that the public school district can currently or does not provide. So either a partial day hospitalization or inpatient hospitalization. There is a mental health crisis. We know this, and there aren't enough beds. There aren't enough seats. And so right now what we are doing is our staff are stretching themselves. That is true in terms of what folks have reported, and it's very much individualized for students. So needs are being met, but is there a smarter, more efficient way, and in a way that we could possibly be even more proactive about this? 100%. Does that require intentionality and really lots of planning and understanding the needs? Absolutely. And then as Dr. Nolan suggested, there is the mental health committee that was a part of the, as a result of the negotiations. It's multi-year, and I'm hoping that that is one of the big things that we look at is not just at high school, but in our middle schools too. What is going on big picture, mental health wise for our kids, and where are those gaps that we need to fill with programming in district? Does that answer your question, Emily?
Sure, it does. Thanks.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Please, Amy, go ahead.
Casey, could you speak a little bit about whether or not there's any mechanism in district for a 45-day eval now that Harbor does not exist?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yes, actually. So we were thoughtful about this last year when we closed the program. So Springboard and Central High School are actually currently operating 45-day as 45-day placements for students.
That was basically my question. So in the absence of these programs, we have other solutions.
100%. Yes, we would not have done that without a plan.
Can I ask a follow-up question? I'm sorry.
Yep, please go ahead.
So, and is there, Central's amazing, by the way. I just want to put that out there. The Central's an amazing program. Do they have the capacity to deal with the potential number of assessments that may come in?
Sure. So the three, so Central is fantastic and Springboard is also equally as fantastic. So the three administrators, Melissa Gamble, who you met last week, Diane Lockhead, who runs Central High School, and Sarah Maxwell, who oversees Springboard, the three of them look at numbers on a very regular basis to make sure that they have capacity. And if they don't, then we think about other alternatives. We contract with outplacements also depending on student needs. So if a student needs a 45-day that we can't handle, then we've already contracted with folks and we have seats at other schools to do that. They're just not within Newton.
That's what most districts do. So in other districts, we would have to contract out 2 places that did the 45-day observations.
Like Dearborn, I guess.
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Amy.
I think I'd like to just say, I think that the approach that you're taking via committee makes complete sense. Most schools have a bridge or a transition or a bright program that operates as a general education support and also a tier 3 support. And it can actually be pretty programmatically challenging to conflate the two things together. So I think as we talk consistently about wanting to very clearly have tiered systems of support across the district, this conversation really belongs in that setting, and I'm excited to hear where you land.
And can you just remind us, because honestly, I can't remember myself, the working group that's going to be studying this big, broad concept, is there
It's a mental health working committee, pre-K to 12.
Yeah, but is there a defined timeline on it that was agreed to? I can't remember that.
Within the next school year. So,
Next school
yeah, because it has to make recommendations by the 26-27 school year. So we have to do it next year to
Okay,
hit the
so
running room. I would also say that the elementary school day scenario and the high school class size, it all has bearing on tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 support. So I feel like to this earlier speaker's point, having time with our teachers to be able to dive into the current conditions and have that enshrined in a way that we must do it and must come with recommendations, which will then come to the committee for consideration, is super important. And we're really looking forward to that. There's a lot of interrelated business about student support. That's, yes, some is mental health and some is gen ed's regular supports. And once we're a little clearer about those needs, I think it will become clearer who needs, say, a tier 3 general education versus an outplacement for a 45-day. So I think it's a huge opportunity for us.
thanks.
Mhm.
And just thinking out loud, we probably, within the next school year, I mean, to the extent there's budgetary implications of whatever the recommendation is,
Mhm.
we probably want to think about that, try to get those recommendations
As soon
by,
as we can.
yeah.
Well, and also just thinking about grant applications and all of, so now that we know the buckets that we're thinking about, we can be proactive right now, well before we're asking for budgetary augmentation.
Great, thank you. Other question, why don't we stay on this topic, to see if there's any other questions that folks have before we, move on to other big picture thoughts. Yeah. Anybody? Okay. Oh, Tamika, go ahead.
Well, it's not a question, but it is just underscoring the point that Emily raised, and the fact that, and I listened carefully, Casey, I think moving in the direction of developing a program that works better for our district, that serves our students in a way that that meets their needs in a therapeutic setting is the goal at the end of a process. And so being excited for that process and being excited for the goal recommendations that come out of it I think that's where I am, and I'm happy with that. And so I think it's great that we had this conversation to really illustrate for the community what the thinking is, what the plan is, and the vision, which is something that's just beautifully embedded in this budget. Thank you.
Thanks, Tamika. Any other comments or questions before we move on this particular topic? Okay. Thank you, Casey, for that input. Much appreciated. Other questions or thoughts about the budget in general? Rajiv, please.
In general, I think we have a good budget in front of us. So the broader questions I'd like to ask are not specific to any individual line item. It goes back to just how much flexibility we have if things don't go as expected or according to plan. Really in two categories. So one is we know there are always uncertainties around enrollment, around special education evaluations, and so on. Do we feel we have a sufficient buffer in place to deal with anything unexpected, like a larger number of students coming in from early intervention, or a higher demand than the already high demand for mental health supports and so on? It's kind of the known areas. Do we feel we are in a reasonable place with a buffer for that? And then the other area, I don't want this to sound like Rumsfeld, but the unknown unknowns, where God forbid, we have some other event we have to deal with, and how flexibly we can address shifting things around for that. Right. So it's a much broader question. How are we feeling in terms of the flexibility of what we have? I'm very happy, by the way, that the other aspect I was hoping for is very much in here, which is advancing our schools. So I'm comfortable on that front. Right.
Well, I mean, on a conceptual level, I guess I'm worried about that flexibility. I think we've worked really hard, Liam's department, the school committee, me, our team, to not leave anything in the shadows. So there's nothing padding the budget that hasn't been illuminated to you. So you know where the funding is being used. You know, that said, it means that something that has been allocated may need to be changed if we have these emergencies. So there's not contingency funding, which is why you're seeing me ask for things like school choice that could give us some flexibility over and above this. That's just one way. Grant funding gives us another. You know, if we start to do capital campaigns directly on certain items, that's another way. But that's not, you know, if there's some major emergency, we will have to move things around within the budget. I don't know how you want to ask that, but I mean, we have 10 positions in waiting for IEPs, which is a lot in my mind, right? So that's a good insurance policy.
Yeah, I mean, so our budgets, we have a large budget in Newton, and I think you've seen over the last number of years, you know, from my perspective, we do need to end in a positive position. But what we've done and we'll continue to do is obviously report to you folks. So if we have emergencies and if we have changes, we would bring them to you. From my perspective, and looking at this long enough, remember, we do have a carry forward reliance still. So we're still, you know, needing to carry forward $3 million into that budget into FY25. Really grateful for the education stabilization account, $4.1 million. It's not technically in our budget, but that's really, we're having an increase of almost $14 million next year. So that's really a big, you know, that's really benefiting our budget. So from my perspective, the fact that we have these fiscal and ops reports, the fact that we've got a dedicated team, we're going to see these in the fact that we have so many meetings internally to know almost in advance if there's going to be something big coming. So we have had enrollment shifts. We've had things that have hit us. And I would say just really the collaboration as well with City Hall. If there are things that are large like that, we've been able to successfully come up with ideas that have been able to help us. So I feel pretty confident that we're going to be able to manage anything that comes our way.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? Just if you had to think about this current budget in terms of that flexibility concept and you know, your level of not sleeping at night, I mean, how would that compare relative to last year or the year before?
Well, I mean, this is a, we talked about the tale of five budgets. This is a complete opposite story from what we went through. Obviously, last year, overrun not passing and a reduction of 40. We have an increase of 46 FTE. We have an education stabilization account for 5 years and potentially for longer. So from my perspective, we're in a much, much better position. The needs are always going to be there. I think that, Dr. Nolan presented a list, our principals have a list that is still really long. But from my perspective, I think that we have presented and put forth a really solid budget. I think, you heard from Steve, I think there'd be a real desire on my part to try to bring that IT budget up over time. But in terms of my level of sleep, it's certainly much better than it has been the last couple of years. We've really been through, feel like we've turned a corner on that. And we're in a position where we've added a lot of staff. And from my perspective, again, this flexibility of the education stabilization account is going to allow us to keep those staff. That's at least in my goal. I don't think none of us want to yo-yo. We're up and down. We want, slow and steady from my perspective is the best way to go.
Thank you. Tamika?
Thanks, Chris. So I think it is a positive budget. I've commented on that previously. I'm actually where Paul is, where I think Nuff said we have a very solid, good budget, and I'd be happy to move it forward earlier rather than not. I will say that the private school transportation issue, I believe it's ancillary to this budget at this time because it may not have a negative budgetary impact, but it potentially could have a positive one, even a nominal positive budgetary impact in the sense that our private school students who are getting transported by our public buses are doing so. They're getting a service beyond which our students here in Newton are getting. And that was something that initially raised my eyebrows when we were considering the recommendation of adding an additional bus a few months ago. And now I think as a committee, we've really been grappling with it a little bit. What we need now at this point, considering that it is ancillary to the budget, not something to be held up within the budget, but certainly something that should be decided contemporaneously, or at least close to contemporaneously as our decision with the budget, is a squaring of what are those services or the transportation services, what is being provided beyond which the state requires. If we were to meet the state requirements, what would that look like? Would that free up, I think we heard from Regina Moody, our transportation director last meeting, that would free up those buses for more in-district use. And to the extent that we are not charging services or charging a fee for a route that we would otherwise charge our public school students a fee for, I think we need to correct that. And as I said, it needs to happen contemporaneously with our budget discussion. So, thank you.
Thanks, Tamika. Well, that requires a response or.
I agree. It should be made in a contingent fashion. It doesn't hold up your vote of the budget, but certainly we're interested in the same answers you are.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. I mean, I think, as we kind of very briefly discussed last time, I think there's the question of logistics of the timing of doing this. And, as much as I think I've kind of stated, my case that I don't think this is, either philosophically or from a budget perspective appropriate. I don't want to completely screw families who are sending their kids to private school and tell them, they've had a bus and now they're not going to have it, next week. So, and I don't think that's going to happen, by the way, just in case anyone's alarmed. But, is this something that the spring, if we enacted this for next year, is that enough time? Is that in unreasonable short period of time? I don't know. I mean, I think I'd like to hear your input, maybe Regina's input as to, how complex this issue is from the perspective of those schools that would be impacted.
I mean, just from a parent notice perspective for those private school families, I think they would need to know now for a subsequent year.
Yeah.
Because that would make their decisions for matriculation in do they come back to schools in January? Would they end in June? We need to be kind to those folks who've been relying on this service.
Right. I mean, I remember when we had this discussion in the fall, thinking we should decide this before January when those deposit checks are due. Because that's
Yep.
impactful to a family's decision-making there. So, I don't know, maybe that's a discussion we can either have offline, Liam, or something we need to bring back in front of the
Okay,
committee shortly.
Sure. I've got material information, particularly on ridership. I've got a memo that I could put forward to the school committee, which, Regina and I could be happy to discuss timing potentially either September or for, either a January, maybe a following September, and discuss, but absolutely would want to be, very, very, cognizant of those families and impact. We're coming up almost, 5-6 months from now. So people's plans, the big takeaway, again, we have about 130 students that are taking the bus now. The current ridership, obviously I would not want to share any information on that. Looking at where their current assigned school would be, essentially there would be almost no students that would be eligible for a yellow bus on the statutory guidelines, which is no closer. You do not have to transport any close or any further, than their home to their assigned public school. So those buses again would be freed up for the public school riders. It would be available, obviously, if they lived, if it was closer than their private school, their public school, we would need to provide transportation. So I have a memo if that was worthwhile, and we could talk about timing. So if that's something of the will of the committee, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Rajiv?
So on this point, would it be possible to receive the memo in time for the next meeting on Thursday and to vote on it at that point in terms of whether this transportation continues or not? Which I think would have to include the timing of when the change happens, if the change is going to happen.
So I don't want to speak for you, Liam, about a Thursday deadline, but your practice is not to vote something the night it is introduced to the community, and this would make me nervous to do that. But we could certainly vote it at the next meeting after that.
Fine. I just want to be cognizant of the fact, as we've all talked about and we had talked about previously, that their families will need to make plans, and if a service they've been using is not going to be available. So if we do make that change, then they will need time to figure that out. And a decision about when any change, if there is going to be one, goes into place would be part of our discussion whenever we have it. If we want to push it out by two sessions, that's fine.
Yeah, I think we would certainly want to have I'm again, just thinking out loud here, at least an opportunity for public input before we would make a decision like that. And I don't know, maybe potentially even reach out to those impacted schools and,
Sorry, Chris, I don't understand why we would reach out to the schools. Parents, I get. Why the schools?
Yeah, we don't actually have all of their emails, et cetera, on file. So there are private school parents who've never matriculated to us nor registered with us. So we would need somehow to notify the places we're dropping off kids.
So there are private school students or families whose contact information we don't have, but we're taking their kids to their schools?
Well, we may have some of them, but not all of them. The ones who take buses.
It's a huge risk. I can't.
The ones who take buses we have.
Yeah, the ones that have buses, Richie, we have their information. We have contact information, home information, addresses, things like that. But
we don't need to contact schools.
It's from my perspective. So the schools, Regina works closely actually with these schools, with Solomon Schechter, with Mount Alvernia, in terms of just if there's any bus issues. So in terms of notifying those schools, I think there probably would be some goodwill in terms of letting these schools know that this is a discussion that it could be taking place. So I think it would be at least worth, is it required? I don't think so, but maybe worth doing.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of it in the context of, being considerate of.
I fully support reaching out to the parents who would be affected. I just don't understand, but if there's agreement, we want to reach out to the schools, it's absolutely fine.
That way, sorry, in many cases, the schools are actually the ones also then communicating out to families as well about busing within Newton as well. So they are a conduit in some ways to the Newton families as well. So as we are as well. So it's kind of a dual piece. But I think these schools, particularly Solomon Schechter, we're in close contact with them in terms of buses, arrivals, things like that. So any kind of change to that type of operation would want to be, I think from my perspective, would be worthwhile being in touch with them. Okay.
Other thoughts on this topic before we move on?
So Liam, is Thursday doable for a
Doable,
memo?
yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so that's Thursday, April 4th. And then our next meeting is Tuesday, April 9th. And then our meeting following that is not until after the break week. So we can figure out the timing of, the 4th to the 9th might be tight timing. Maybe we want to think about if this is a decision we're going to go forward with, to push that to the following meeting to allow ample time for folks to probably mostly yell at us. Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, other thoughts, budget, big picture. Amy?
Anna, can I ask some questions about the principal need proposals that showed up in a tale of however many budgets? It's like poetic, beautiful, from the 20th of March. There are some asks on this list that I think in fact are reflected in the budget.
Yep.
And so some of them I think are compliance driven in particular, but
Correct.
the reflections additions
Yes.
at Williams. So some of the things that folks have asked for are in fact reflected.
Correct.
Could you talk a little bit about the extent to which that's true at the high school level? There are so many asks for STEM, for engineering, and I can't tell which of those are like pie in the sky versus like an immediate reality.
Yeah, so those requests that are in there are the ones we included in the Education Stabilization Fund. So Liam and I piloted a different process with our secondary principals and met individually with each principal with a template about goals, the data that was helping them to get to it, and what were the asks. And then Liam floated it into this particular document. We then also took things that had been cut before and shared them as well. Just, and we'll keep looking at those lists. And I just want to be clear that we're a new team to each other, that this is a new process for the principals. Do not hang us by this list in a year, because we may be smarter in some way about how to achieve our goals that may not include these same asks. And we'll be real open about that. But principals were worried, like, did I ask for enough, too much? They don't want to be judged by that at this time as a snapshot of need. This was what they put forward. So, but those do reflect some of those asks. There are certainly more asks from them, but these were the ones that appeared to match up with the experience of students, staff, and parents. So you sort of got like a 3-for-1 piece of happiness there by funding those.
Yeah, and as a follow-up, do you know to what extent, if any, principals shared what they were asking for with their staff?
I don't know that. Maybe the assistant soups would know that, but I do know that some of our elementary staff have been doing their own State of the Schools presentations. And so my guess is that those pieces are coming through because that's how we're talking to families now. This is what our needs are. We may ask for these things. I just think the general consciousness of parents right now is quite high in terms of the through line between what's discussed at these types of meetings and what gets into the budget. That's a good place for us to be and to capitalize on that. So I do think more conversations are happening, but let me ask and I can get that information for you.
Thanks.
Anything else, Amy?
We happen to have principal meeting tomorrow morning, so easy done.
Other thoughts or questions? I say, Mayor Fuller, I know you're going to have something.
So I want to frame where we are with this fiscal year budget, FY25, and just look ahead to the next 5 years for a little while. We had an unusual, never has happened in the city before, payment by Eversource that, thanks to our assessing department, had since 2012 been working to change, oddly enough, state law, or it's the state DPU practice, which resulted in us being able to set aside $22 million over 5 years for NPS. Otherwise, we're back at the usual financial ecosystem in the city of Newton, which is shockingly stable, 2.5% growth in revenues from Prop 2.5 that we're allowed to do, plus new growth. You can almost always count on a 1% increase there in our revenues from that. Sometimes it's a better year, maybe it's 1.5%. That fluctuates with the economic cycle. So a 3.5% increase in the budget for the Newton Public Schools is what we can really depend on, plus for a 5-year period, the use of these Eversource funds that we have worked out a way to use them over 5 years. Whether it is our educators who, as our second speaker, I think she was first tonight, talked about, the educators are raising their hand and saying, we're seeing really important needs that we should fulfill for our students, or whether it's coming from the principals or a superintendent, or parents and caregivers are seeing it. I think all of us are seeing that there's plenty of amazing and good work to do to meet our kids' needs that would require an increase of over 3.5% plus the stabilization fund. I think we are in a good place for the next 5 years because we can essentially count on a 5% increase for these years. But to do better, to do more, to help our students thrive, you could imagine why we want more than 5%. And that will require our taxpayers to raise their hand and say, yep, I'm going to agree to increasing our taxes through an operating override. There's very little any mayor can do to change the fundamental economics of the city of Newton. We certainly want to have appropriate development and growth. What appropriate is contentious sometimes. You saw all of us live through thinking about zoning for our village centers. That's where economic development occurs. And we want to get that just right also for the quality of life in the city. So I just want to encourage us to certainly look at the FY25 budget, but really continue to focus on the next 5 to 10 years for the Newton Public Schools, to support Dr. Nolan as she takes a deep dive into what can make us thrive and support our children most of all.
Thank you. Other questions, thoughts? Anping?
Budget is always a complicated topic, and during the past few months, leading to strike, and people talk about, there's not enough information or misinformation. Sometimes probably people are looking for some information, not necessarily that not enough information, or probably people did not see the information they wanted to see. That's human nature. I guess we all included. So here, Mayor, you mentioned about 35% increase. That's something we can count on in the following years. That's nice. And I'm asking a question which I'm a layman, so I even don't know what terms. So this 3.5% increase, in the real sense, is there any increase or including the inflation factor? Whether that money, basically inflation might be 3% or 4%. As a matter of fact, the school department does not have any more money, even though we say the 3.5% increase. Of course, now we have 5%, including the educational stabilization fund money. So that's wonderful, and we can count on that for following 4 or 5 years. So, but yeah, explain a little bit more so we can understand the.
Ping, you're asking a fabulous question. I remember looking back at the years that Seti Warren was mayor, and there was no inflation essentially. I mean, it was tiny. Welcome to our world that we're all living in, whether we're going to the grocery store, or the gas station, or whatever, or being a superintendent. The concept of nominal and real, just to use the economic terms, the 3.5% is not inflation adjusted. It is just the sheer number of dollars. And what's terribly difficult for us as human beings, as running our households, is when the things you might get a raise of, let's say 3.5%, you as in your salary or the budget for the Newton Public Schools, but if costs are going up 7%, a lot of good that did you. But it's not how revenues work in a municipal setting. Prop 2.5 is Prop 2.5, whether it's a low inflation or high inflation environment. Same thing with economic development. So inflationary years are really, really tough for people whose salaries depend on municipal budgets, or for a superintendent who is creating a budget.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yep, Paul.
Thanks. Mayor Fuller and I have spent too many years doing municipal finance together to disagree about anything she's just said. But what I would add is, I think what we have going for us, or I hope what we have going for us over the next 5 and beyond years, is the vision from Dr. Nolan. It's a vision that is strongly based on the actual delivery of educational services to our children that's measurable, where we will be held accountable to the things she's trying to do. She's made that commitment as part of her agenda. I think the degree to which the public has confidence that they're getting their money's worth, whether the regular allocation or future increases over time, will be directly tied to fulfilling that promise that she's put out. She's talked about a portrait of a graduate, basically saying, what's the final product we're trying to deliver here? And she's put together a process that's going to get wide community input on that value statement, and which enables us to provide a report card along with the other things she's proposing to the community, to what I expect and hope will be an ever increasing vote of confidence on the part of the public in what we're doing. So I'm I don't know if you're optimistic or pessimistic or non-committal about where we go after year 5. I'm actually quite optimistic because I think Dr. Nolan has laid out a plan that will be persuasive to the public that not only are they getting their money's worth, but that this will be a school system that will be ever improving in a way that the community will feel and see. And if we have that, I think we'll be in good shape in the body politic. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Paul. I guess just to share my thoughts, I think we started this budget process and it just felt entirely different than it has the last 2 years, and I mean that in a very positive way. That is in large part thanks to the Education Stabilization Fund and the very, very real impact that's going to have immediately for our students, for our staff, and for families throughout this district. So I think we do, and when we presented to the city council back in February, I guess it was, the one slide I put in front of them that I said is the most important thing you all have to focus on is what happens after 5 years. And there is a 2 to 3 year gap that we are going to have to face, and we are going to have to fund, and we need to start thinking about that now and start coming up with solutions. And and I know personal discussions I've had with Liam and Sean and the finance folks is, we have this Education Stabilization Fund, and we want to make sure we utilize it in the absolute, highest and best way. But at the same time, every dollar that, we can find in efficiency is a dollar that goes towards that 6 year. That's kind of the way I think about this. And, I would say that from the city perspective too. I mean, certainly, it's all about starting to address that challenge, and the more manageable we can make that challenge, the less painful it's going to be, whether that means less painful from a negative perspective or less painful from a we have to go out and ask voters for incremental funds and making that as bite-sized a chunk as possible. At the same time, I very much want to commend Dr. Nolan for, I think, one of the biggest asks we've had as a committee, and I feel like Kathy Smith did this last year pretty well, and it's even more so this year, is recognizing that the budget is supposed to reflect what we need, not what we can afford. And our starting point is, what do we need? And I feel like we really got that. And that's, the singular thing that makes me feel different about this year, to be the first time in the 3 times I'll have done this where I feel, I think, very comfortable voting in favor of the budget, which, wasn't really the place I was in the last couple of years. So, from my perspective, going back to Paul's original point, I personally feel comfortable. I think, I'm guessing, I think most people on the committee feel comfortable if on Thursday night, we move forward with a final vote and not a straw vote. So, we can let that happen Thursday night, and, if someone moves the budget for a vote, we can certainly take that vote. So Lisa, maybe we want to just put that on the agenda to say straw vote and possible final vote for the budget. And then that will be there so everyone can take note of that in the community. Any other questions or thoughts before we move on? Okay, great. Thank you everyone for all those thoughts, and thank you to Liam and team and Dr. Nolan for what I think has been a fairly smooth process.
So if I may, Mr. Chair, Assistant Superintendent Romer is here now with an update about AP scores that Rajiv had asked before. So I just want you to have the answers right away.
Thank you. And not even so much scores, but the, having lost 2 weeks of prep time, were we able to help?
Yeah, I'm sorry I wasn't here when you asked your question earlier, so if it's helpful to clarify, but I know as a parent of a high school senior myself as well, I know this is a really unprecedented college application season based on all of the delays at the federal level with the FAFSA form that continued to dog the process. But on our side, and just in response to your question, checked with our principals at Newton North and Newton South, there should not be any delays with any of the materials that we submit to colleges as part of the college application process, whether that be transcripts, including the midterm grades, college recommendations, and the rest of that process. So I don't know if I missed more detail to your questions or concerns that people had, but we are up to date on that and working really hard with the class of 24 to make sure that they have, all the full access and opportunities that every other class has had. As challenging as that is this year, it's certainly delaying that process for many of our seniors, as I know many of you know. So it's frustrating.
And Toby, that was the question. In terms of there had been delays. I'm still on Henry's email list, so I knew that the principals were reaching out to colleges, were letting them know that there would be delays with the transcripts. We also, I think we're trying to work with students to see if they could take their APs on an alternate date.
Yeah, oh, okay. The testing schedule, yeah.
So just really, have we been able to help our seniors with?
That's the second part of the question you had about the testing schedule for AP exams, because those are fixed in time, and then there's a makeup date which is at the end of the AP testing period. So on a subject by subject basis, we've looked at both schools at which exams it made sense to stick to the preset date, knowing that we would have plenty of time to prepare students well for that, or move the entire class to the makeup date at the end of the testing period. So those decisions have all been completed with the input of the teaching staff, communicated with the students and families in those classes. And I think folks are feeling good and clear about what those options are. So that's in place. Back to the transcript and mid-year grades, any delays there were a matter of days from our usual routine based on the timing of the strike, and have been completed at this point for almost a couple months. Yep.
Thank you, Toby.
All right.
Nice guest cameo. Good.
Thank you.
All right. I think that wraps up our
So we have a couple
budget review.
items, left. Okay.
So yeah, 2 items left. We have the food.
I thought you were closing it down.
No,
Sounded like you were.
wasn't going. I finished the sentence. I said concludes the budget discussion. Food service vendor discussion, and then a further discussion on school choice. So for our food service vendor discussion, Amy Mistro, always good to see you.
Thank you. Amy asked to be in person tonight, so we wanted to, this is a big decision for us. So we have been through, Amy has been through working on this now for months. As you folks know, I'm going to pass this over to Amy in a moment here. We're basically at the end of our 5th year with Whitson's, which has been our food service management company, FSMC, so see this acronym. That's what that is. And so we've gone out to bid, and Amy has spent a ton of time just developing the bid documents and getting vendors out here, having a tour of our buildings and answering questions. So we've got results in. We have looked at those results, and we have a recommendation for you. So I'm going to turn this over to Amy. Obviously, many questions folks may have, we'd be happy to answer. But Amy, if you want to walk us through kind of just a little bit of the process, and then it's kind of some of our thinking in terms of our decision with moving to Chartwells. So.
Hi, everyone. I'll let the memo speak for itself for the most part, and I won't drag you through the details of that. I tried to encapsulate as much as possible and answer any questions that you might have. It has been an extensive process. As you can see by the timeline, it is still a relatively new process. This is DESE's 2nd year with this bid template and contract. Last year, it was a PDF form fillable document, which apparently did not work well. This year was a web-based template, which when I went to the training on 11/29, and they said it was going to be ready in December, and I said, went in December and they looked at the consultant and he said 12/32. So there was no hope in December. And we didn't get it until the 18th of January. So the timeline has been very condensed. And they suggest to allow 4 to 6 weeks to have the RFP in the vendor's hands, which we allowed for 5. So our turnaround was pretty quick. And when we had the food service vendors here in February, I told them, please to provide me a little bit of grace. I was a newbie and to take a little bit easy on me. I said, however, I have learned a lot in the last 2.5 years. So this was, I pushed Desi a lot in the last 2 weeks, asking questions so that I could do this within the guidelines that they provided. And through that process, we had interviews on the 20th with 4 vendors. And really one came away having responded to what I asked them when we had the in-person meeting with them. And I said, I've left you a crumb trail in the RFP. We were worked very hard to put Newton-specific information in there. I said, it's all there. Just read it and see if you respond. And one vendor they came ready to respond. They brought an impressive team. They had looked at what we were looking for. And the challenge I said to them was, I want to make the Newton Public Schools food service program an exemplar in the state. I want people coming to us and saying, what are you doing there? How are you getting your kids engaged this level? How are you getting the participation numbers that you are? That's not going to be an easy task. When I went to do comparable districts to look to see, I was foolish. Desi recommended 5 references and I thought, well, I'm going to do 7 then. There is not 7 districts anywhere near like Newton anywhere. If you're this large, usually you're a CEP district, which means that your low income percentage is very high. Therefore, your participation is naturally very high. If you have a low income percentage similar to Newton's, which is 13%, you're a much smaller district. To have 23 schools, almost 12,000 kids, and a low income percentage of 13%, it just doesn't exist. So we like to think we're really unique. We really are that unique. But we've got somebody who is excited to partner with us and talked about the priorities that are critical. In my short-lived experience in food services, you must be in the schools and you must train the staff. We are only as good as our weakest school. We're only as good as our weakest food service worker. And our kids deserve to have food served to them by highly trained staff who understand how to make food not only taste good, but look good. I've recently had a feedback from a parent who said, the kids say that the food's really good and the 3rd graders are eating it. They said it just doesn't look good. And I was like, wow, if we could just have it all. And both look and taste good. So that's where we're going. Chartwell's is our recommendation. They far and away responded to the challenge that we presented. They are very, very excited about the opportunity to come to Newton and partner with us. And I will leave it there and ask if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Amy. And thank you for the level of detail you provide in the memo and the criteria for evaluation and everything. Questions from members? Tamika, then Paul.
Thanks, Chris. So having sat on a couple of these RFP processes myself, I know when you say that it's an extensive process, you are being modest. And I know also when you describe yourself as a newbie to this process, perhaps in this vein, but not in general, you that again, you're being a little modest. I've seen the care and consideration that you, Amy Mistro, have put into making sure that we as a district are doing the best we can with our equipment, overhauling the equipment that we have for food preparation as needed. And so I have no doubt that you leading this effort, that it was a thorough and a rigorous process, and that you put out within the RFP itself but then within the interviews, that you put out the expectations of this district and you set them at a high enough standard, and then that was our need and our demand for the food service management company. And so I'm very pleased that this recommendation reflects that level of care and attention to detail. And I thank you for the work. I thank the entire evaluation team as well.
Thank you, Tamika.
Thank you. Paul?
Beautifully stated. I totally agree. Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that the school committee approves to move Chartwell's forward as a successor food service management company for a one-year contract that allows 4 additional contract extensions based upon our satisfaction with the ongoing operations.
Okay, thank you. There's a motion. Is there a second to that motion?
Can I ask a quick question?
Let's first, we will have discussion on the motion, so let's first see if there's a second to the motion.
I second.
Thank you. So moved by Paul, second by Rajiv, and I'll say that was moved to approve the contract as stated in the memo for simplicity purposes.
Whatever I just.
And what, to be clear, for the one-year contract with successor contract, et cetera.
I just comment.
Yeah, please go ahead, and then I'm Pink. And then Amy.
Then
Emily.
I think Tamika has put it forth in an excellent fashion, and I just want to add to that the degree of thought, rigor, analysis, sensitivity to the needs of all the schools and the children and the staff in the schools doesn't come through to the full extent that it actually existed. That Amy, you and your team, I think, have done a superb job on this, that I have total confidence in the process you used and in the recommendation you make, and I would urge us to approve the motion. Thanks.
Thank you. Anping?
Amy, I echo my colleagues' comments. Thank you. Always be mindful. Comments about the process. It's never easy, and food is, as we all know, it's always a little bit critical. Well, anyone can challenge and criticize, complain, everything. I just quickly review, read through this and even review the website of the Chartwell. Seems the website is very colorful, well-designed, dynamic, but we also know in this case, seeing is misleading. You have to taste, and tasting is better than seeing. So here, regarding the recommendation here, the second one say they propose the highest food cost per meal, reinforcing the fundamental focus on quality. So could you share a little bit what you guys found out after you reviewed their proposal? Something impressed you or something, the feedback you got? Because it sounds very nice. It might be a little bit expensive, right? Expensive than other bidders. So I'm curious, normally people are looking for low bidders than the high bidders, but here you recognize the highest cost per.
It was the highest cost of the proposals that we received for food costs, although how we're required to award the bid is based upon the highest guaranteed return. So although their food costs were higher, they also provided a substantial return of $505,000, which we can then use to purchase food service equipment. And we have some license within DESE to also use that for compensation with our food service workers to be able to attract and retain them. So that's how those funds will be used to benefit the system kind of on a recurring reinvestment. It was the two of those things, the focus on quality and their operational strategy, how they have the district staffed. They are talking about having a food service manager here, an executive chef, a registered dietitian, this sustainability and engagement manager, and then 3 chef managers whose focus is to be out in the schools and ensure that everything that they're thinking in Newton North actually happens out in the school. So it
Sounds-
was a combination of all those factors.
So in that case, probably a natural question would be, there will be no increase of the cost to students, to
There will be
families.
no increase in cost to students.
That sounds good. I think that's probably more concerning to folks here, eventually, we don't want to see, significant increase of the price for the meal, for the high quality, but that's very nice way of the business model. Whatever they do, I could not fully understand what they're doing in terms of make sure high quality food, but not high price
Yes.
associated with the food. Thank you.
One of the things, just to provide further context, that has made Newton more desirable in this RFP process than in past, where our returns were projected to be substantially lower, is the governor's commitment to continued universally free meals to students. With that, we cover, the goal is to not just cover our set costs. So if we have to have a food service lead in every building, we have to have that if 30% of the kids are eating or if 55% of the kids are eating. Where you start to make the program more productive is when you go well beyond those set costs and start to return profit. The vendors now know with this universally free situation, they have greater confidence that they can both deliver a quality program and make it profitable for both the district and for the company themselves.
Thank you, Anping. Amy.
So I think food is like really important. And if I think explicitly about the district's mission to be welcoming and inclusive, I think that food actually plays a really, really important role in doing both of those things. And so I have a request for the future and then a question about the launch. My request for the future is that I'd love to get a sense, assuming that that we vote to approve the motion, of participation at the high school level now versus in October of 2024. And I'd say I'm particularly curious about the high school level because that's an audience that has other options, both in the moment and pre-planned, because they have privileges. And so I'd be curious to see, with increased quality and support towards really important district initiatives, whether students vote with their feet. So I'd love to get a glimpse of that in the future. And I do think you have a PR challenge in relaunching some more exciting options. And I wondered if the vendor spoke a little bit about how they'll, promote their improved product to the masses.
They actually staffed their proposal that way to have a dedicated sustainability and engagement manager to not just do some of these things, which sometimes Whitson's, our current vendor, has tried to do, but can't get out in front of it enough. And if you can't build the excitement, then it just happens and it goes away. Also sharing it out to our community of parents so they know what's happening in the school and build some confidence about what their kids are eating. So that is a function that, honestly, when I first saw it, I thought, we don't need that. And then when they came and presented, I thought, okay, now I get it. Yeah, we do need that. So I'm actually really excited about that position. And given that we put a pretty big stake in the ground about our sustainability interests, that was another thing where they really paid attention and combined those two roles to provide that additional capacity.
Barry, I think we had Emily next and then you. Amy, anything else? Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you. Emily, go ahead.
You asked my question about how are we going to get high school students engaged and involved, because obviously we have a push-pull between what's happening in the schools and other places that the students can go to. First and foremost, a huge thank you to your team. I also want to call out Carrie because I think she's amazing.
Yep.
So thank you on both the city side and on the NPS side. I was really, really happy to see the 6 bulleted items in terms of what it was that they were proposing, especially the sustainability piece. I know how important that is, and I hope that we can start moving forward with some of the things that Stephanie Gilman's been trying to get in place for a long time now, including composting and other exciting, interesting things in each of the buildings. So thank you for that. They sound wonderful. And, if we vote for them, which I'm kind of assuming we are at this point, that I very much am looking forward to getting to know them and seeing the changes that they enact in the district.
Thank you, Emily. Barry?
I just have a process question. How did they address the fact that we have schools that have beautiful brand new kitchens and schools that have like a room from 1950? And the fact that we should be providing the same level quality of food to both groups of kids?
We've done some work in the last year to replace a lot of our old equipment. We've also bought freezers for all of our elementary schools to be able to have food on hand and take some of the urgency out of food delivery each day. Our goal is to, I actually applied for a grant. I applied for 2 grants. I got one, I didn't get the second one, but we have the funds that we can go ahead and do it. And it's to purchase blast chillers to put in each of the 3 newer elementary school kitchens. And then we're going to employ teams on Wednesdays when they don't have the same level of preparation that they have to do in the schools into the 3 schools to create meals, cook together, create meals, blast chill them, and create a new level of freshness, even though they'll be blast chilled, but freshness into our elementary school, that we're doing kind of more scratch cooking, which we haven't been able to do because of that difference in capacity. But we're going to use what we can to equalize the experience.
Thank you. You're welcome. Commissioner Fuller?
Oh, what a long road it's been. So in 2009, I was part of a citizen advisory group that worked heavily with the Newton Public Schools, among other departments. And food service was not, this is a revenue center now. It'll be a $500,000 revenue center with lots of hope for improved quality, taste, looks. 2009, it was very much a cost center, over $1 million, with such deep concerns about quality. So that I just want to Amy and your predecessors, it's been a 15-year journey, and it's really exciting to see our next step forward. Well done.
I think one of the few industries that benefited from COVID was food services.
Other questions? Okay, Amy asked, I think sort of what I wanted to get at was kind of that, participation rate. And I mean, it looks like it wasn't close from a, from a non-cost perspective, looking at the evaluation you put forth of, it's 25% higher than the next closest candidate. And then, at the same time, you're going to have a, higher guaranteed return, but a higher food service cost. It seems almost, I don't know.
Too good to be true?
Yeah. It's rarely do those things come together in that way. And so I was curious, do you have visibility on what their assumptions were of, okay.
Yep.
What is their, how does their participation rate compare to assumed participation rate?
I capped their participation rate at 55%.
Okay.
Because I learned this from another food service director who I spoke to. He does the same. He's a CEP district, but he said, sure. He said, if I'm currently at 70%, but I have somebody come in and tell me we can get you 85%. He said, they can't, but they can win the bid that way. So I capped their participation. So I put them on a level playing field. And I was like, I'm going to remember that, which I did.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the vendors went right up to that. Chartwell's hasn't even gone up to that. They're being realistic in where they think they can take it right away.
Okay. What's the participation rate now?
We're over 40% now, somewhere between 40 and 45%. The counts have been going up this year.
Okay. So some vendors were assuming an entire 10 percentage point, 20-some% increase relative to now.
That's our goal. We want to get
Yep.
to 55%.
Yep. Okay.
Not more.
Yeah. So I think it will be really important to that branding point. And, I think we have to, as a district, get that word out to families. There's certainly some I'm sure, lingering skepticism in the community about food service.
They have to put
It
the
came
proof
up at
on
our
the-
PTO meeting this morning.
There you go.
They have to put the proof on the plate.
Yes, exactly.
This is,
So,
it was a great proposal. We'll see. They have to prove it.
perfect. Okay, I don't have anything else. Is there any other comments, questions on the motion? Rajiv?
Very quick comment. I think to satisfy some of the questions, the next time around at the one-year evaluation, we expect tasting notes.
We won't have that.
When we did the tour of the schools with city council, someone came up with a great, I can't remember which counselor it was, said, we really should be doing this as a lunch in one of the school cafeterias. So,
They've done that before during previous bids when we had this before.
yeah,
At the
so,
school committee. As a school committee, they came with samples.
Not that we need the sample.
Yep, no.
and sorry, I did have
So
one other
many perks
question,
to
just
the
as a
job.
point of clarification, because I think Barry asked a great question of the, the difference of new schools and old schools, and, this has been a little point of contention of mine over the time I've been here. You said that there's chefs, that are going to be out making, when you said sort of making sure what leaves Newton North, is what they envisioned it. That's effectively what you're referring to when that food's going out to all the schools that Newton North serves. That's what you were referring to?
Newton North doesn't actually serve any elementary
doesn't?
schools anymore. They do heat and serve in each school. The only schools that are delivered food directly are NECP and here at the Ed Center. Otherwise, it's being cooked in the school. However, quality can vary by person and presentation really varies. And as much as they can in a Wednesday meeting sit down with staff and say, this is what it should look like, they need somebody in there with them saying, let's do this, let's prep your kitchen a different way, let me show you how to do this, and that's what I want.
Gotcha. Okay. That's a really helpful clarification. Thank you. Oh, Amy, go ahead.
You should find a way to mobilize your secondary student body for PR. Like there should be a food services intern who's managing social and like posting plate pics and using secret sauce hashtag puns and
I'm doing everything I can over here.
this is we need our high school people here.
We
like, to
have
start the
12
PR now.
interns. We have 12 interns who work here. I'm sure we could get someone on it.
Any food analogy we know is right up your alley. So everything's got to be a food
I'm
analogy.
pretty consistent. I'm just gonna say.
All right. Any other comments? All right, we'll take a vote then on Paul's motion to approve Chartwell's as as laid out in the memo here. Ward 1.
Yes.
Ward 2 is yes. Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward 8,
Yes.
Ward 9, Mayor Fuller.
Yes.
All right, great. That is approved 9-0. Thank you so much, Amy. Appreciate all your hard work on this.
Thank you. If I can just take a minute to, it's written in the memo, but just to say in the midst of the meeting, to thank the evaluation committee, Sharon Fukazawa, David Stickney, Ruth Hashino, Liam Hurley gave a lot of effort and energy to this and came and really, really engaged in such a helpful way. Procurement has been phenomenal, and my two DESI contacts, I would not have gotten through this without them. So thank you to everybody. It was a team effort.
Great. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
All right. And then for our final agenda item tonight, we have another discussion on school choice, and Liam doesn't get to leave
I'm
us
staying up
tonight.
here.
Just the star of the show tonight.
Oh.
Thanks, Amy.
So this is actually basically the same presentation you folks have seen. I'm sorry. We just we've updated the dates here. We've obviously had a number of discussions on school choice. I think the goal in my mind, any further questions or refinement or things like that. So I would just want to maybe just do a quick run through and just one more time in terms of the school choice program, what it is. And this is a program where students from other communities can actually enroll within a district. We're not required to do that, but we have to vote to opt out, which Newton, I believe, has historically always opted out. So this is something that we're looking at for the first time, I think, very seriously on our side. And again, this is a vote of the school committee to do. Once a school choice student is in, as you recall, they can stay through upon graduation. As another reminder, these students provide income. We get $5,000 per student that actually would come into a school revolving account, and that money can be spent without, they use the phrase without further appropriation. So it means the school committee, we have basically authority to use that money. Typically, school districts use it to reduce a teacher salary line item, something like that. So, and as you recall, and we put a lot of kind of comments in this, there's some additional incremental funding for students on special education services. You fill out some of the circuit breakers, some forms that you would be receiving some additional funding for those students depending on the service they would have. We also talked about out-of-district placements that would be basically be paid by the sending district. So we would not be on the hook for any student that would be placed out of district. That sounds like it's pretty uncommon to happen. There's certainly a non-discrimination requirement involved with this if for any student that comes in. And then obviously I talked about just once these students are in, they have the same rights to educational and co-curricular programs as our resident students. Transportation is not, other than if it's on a student's IEP, again, which typically it's the sending district, but yellow bus transportation is not provided. So if somebody's coming from a surrounding community, it's up to that family or that student to get to their school. This is a lot of information just on this DESE cost calculator and special education on kind of what we would need to fill out. A lot of timeline here in terms of kind of this date. Some of these dates I may or may not. I think these hold the April 23rd. That date may be changing a little bit as well. So I think with that, Dr. Nolan, I don't know if there's any pieces more you wanted to add to this, but I think it's just an opportunity for us to think about.
Just every school visit that we've had, the same question about school choice comes up, which is this, that the school choice program is not meant to bring in the full cost of per pupil tuition into a district. It's meant to be an empty seat program, which allows us, as to use a bus, not a food, but a bus metaphor. If there's a bus that we own and there's, 50 of 70 seats filled, we've already paid for the gas and the driver and the repair and the parking and all of the things. And so there are 20 extra seats. And so the school choice program works the same way. It tries to say, where could we put additional students into our classes that would not require us to hire and create a new classroom and those types of things. Now, it doesn't always work out perfectly, so there are risks, but that is the number one question that families have asked, saying like, it's not the full per pupil expenditure. It's not intended to be. Just wanted to make sure people understand that it's not a one-for-one scenario. And also just people need to understand what per pupil costs are composed of, which includes things like snow plowing and computers and networks that already exist within the schools. So obviously we want as many dollars as we can for every student's attendance per se, but this is meant to supplement our already existing budget. That was the number one question that parents have asked.
And one thing to point out here, I know in the slide, it said the public hearing is currently scheduled for April 23rd, which we originally had for the 24th. We moved to the 23rd as the city council asked us to present our budget to them on the 24th. We're now going to try and figure out if we can do the public hearing first and then the city council presentation after on the 24th, because we have some serious scheduling conflicts with Passover that week. So we are hopefully going to have an answer on that in the very, very near future, just for anyone who's marking their calendar. With that, discussion on school choice. I know we've all been through this a couple times and, all have some evolving views on it. So I saw Paul, then Barry. We'll start there.
I'm sorry. A few questions for Liam and or Dr. Nolan. I think your bus analogy is correct, but I think it changes slightly over the lifetime of a student child. being added to an existing class, that the analogy you gave is exactly right, that the marginal cost to the district of that student is very, very small. Basically, there's some supplies. In essence, it's basically just some supplies. But it feels like that changes as we go up the grades, in that by the time we get to high school, that student or several of those students could cause the need for an additional section of an elective or something else, in which case the marginal cost may still be less than $5,000, but it's it feels like there's less of a margin, if we call it profit.
Well, it's less clean for sure. It's less, it's harder to track the impact when you get into the high school level. Even at team levels, it's because you're looking at your enrollment by that grade level and then dividing it by middle school sections. It's still pretty much going to work out the same way, right? That you move those sections of elementary, if you will, up to middle school. There's some fluctuation. It's not going to add a whole new section, right? But it could be that there's bubbles at the high school level, but there are bubbles anyway. So when you schedule levels of anything or electives, you know, as Amy can certainly attest, there's going to be these outliers that could happen anyway. The trick is to curate the enrollment enough by grade level that you're not overloading any one particular grade level, you know, unless you have immense space and no risk. But I think we would have to be conservative about how we approached it.
Which leads to my second question.
Mm-hmm.
You have a current view of that number and distribution of students that you're going to bring to us?
So we would, if you choose to accept this mission, we will come to you with some models that you could look at for how we would approach it.
Barry?
I just wanted to say that I'm clear on this topic. I think that there's never going to be a perfect time to do it, but if you look to the conversation that we had earlier tonight on budget, that now's the time for us to be creative and to try and find other ways to help boost our budget for the future. And I think this is one of those opportunities. I thank you for the clarification on the per pupil spending, because I've heard that a lot too. And that's very clear to me. To the question that Paul just asked on when you would come back to us with different models, do we have the ability to, are we voting on that, or are we giving guidance? Like, what happens?
I haven't seen any votes on the actual enrollment, but I would come to you and would seek that guidance. I mean, I only do this, you know, I serve at your pleasure here, if you will. So, you know, you're in charge of the budget. This has a budget impact. So we would need to be comfortable with that together. Now, we do have in our new teacher contract the expectation that our currently enrolled staff children who do not live in Newton would put their name in. So we know that, but that doesn't mean, like, we can bind the case and say how many and at what grade level we would accept into that program. So that's what we want to figure out. What would that sweet spot be given our current enrollment?
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Mika, then Anping.
Thanks, Chris. So viewing students as a revenue driver has never been a consideration of the Newton Public Schools. I think this would be a seismic shift in that philosophy. When we think about the fact that there is no compelling public policy justification for implementing school choice in this district, I think for me, that really does solidify that there is no justification for implementing school choice, but for capitalizing on the $5,000 per child benefit that we would receive. That's different from a program like METCO, where we do get a financial compensation for for Metco students who participate in that program and attend the Newton Public Schools. There are many compelling public policy justifications that make that program not only desirable for a district in terms of boosting the numbers of students of color, students of diverse backgrounds and economic needs in our schools, but also there's a corollary benefit for the students who are getting the access of our wonderful district, of our wonderful education here in NPS. So I'm going to separate that out from school choice. School choice has none of that as the backdrop. It is simply a way to get additional funds for students. I don't know if I'm comfortable with that as a base threshold objective. The objective, which some folks have kind of conceptualized as boosting our numbers of students in individual schools, that isn't exactly the package that I'm seeing here. In fact, it's very much not what is being put forward. It's not being put forward as a solution to some of our shrinking or undersized schools, the Ward, the Underwood, the Pierce, Williams, I'll throw into that category. It is different from that. So if we were looking at this as a holistic way of saying Newton needs students, we are open to exploring all means of getting those students, I'd probably have a different reaction. And so the fact that there's no public policy justification, the fact that this doesn't solve any of our existing problems, and the fact that it potentially could exacerbate problems that we already have, which is why I've heard the superintendent say that we wouldn't touch the high schools. It would exacerbate spacing issues and crowding issues and access to classes if we were to do that. I think that's the right way to go. However, backing out further, I've asked in previous presentations for us to really get a full and comprehensive look at how school choice is done across the state and whether there are problems related to school choice, whether there are different approaches to addressing those problems that other districts have successfully implemented. I haven't really heard much analysis of that in our discussions, and I think that's a real miss. I think that I would want to have the more detailed upfront as part of our consideration analysis of how this program would look, who would manage it, how would the lottery function? If it's a program that's going to do it, tell us what that is. I think that's all should be embedded in our consideration as to whether this is something that we should move to do before, not after, we authorize it. I think my colleague Rajiv has mentioned perhaps putting out a memo for not only ourselves to consider, but for our community to consider in terms of like putting forward our opinions and why we think it's a good idea, why we think it might be a challenging or poor idea, and really embedding that in our materials for the meeting, because we haven't really, I've said that this morning at our PTO meeting, our meetings are dry, and to assume that folks out there are actually paying attention and understand what we're grappling with, what we've been talking about for many, many meetings. Thank you, Liam. I think that again is a miss. There's a lot of ambiguity about what it is we're talking about. So putting out something like that is something I'd be in favor of, and I will make a point to do that for our next time we pick up this discussion topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Tamika. King?
I think Tamika makes quite eloquent reason to be a little bit more considerate. And I think something you made very clear that we did not do a good job, or the NPS leadership did not do a good job to convince us. However, I want to say at this time, I would give full support to this school choice. My argument is that, first of all, this showing to district our school department is willing to make efforts to try to increase our school budget, even though not significantly. It's probably $1 million. Are we talking about in a very positive way, or kind of hopeful?
So 50 students would be about 250,000. You'd need almost, 200 students for $1 million. So whatever range we're
It
thinking, I
depends
think,
what-
it depends on the number of
you're
students.
comfortable with.
Okay. I think this is very important. And I've been thinking about that because we heard some argument from committee saying a lot of waste of money. Okay. Might be somewhere, and no one can promise we save every penny everywhere. But at least this way, increase you guys' work, no doubt. And management, logistical issues, and taking care of them, because we will guarantee they will have education until they graduate from high school. So that's a long-term commitment. But again, I think that has the value here. Really, we want to show to the community, and school is willing to work hard. Okay, for financial reason, let's be frank. But also, I think there's some value for the families who want to send kids to Newton to have better education. In that way, probably not too much different from the medical programs. In Boston, many families, Boston provides, very decent quality education. But some families, they do want to send their kids to Newton and other suburban towns. And so in that way, I think that there's value here. And, those families must very appreciate if they're willing to do that, because they have a disadvantage to send their kids to Newton. And transportation is not easy for them. So I'm thinking about all these levels. And also, last things, I think Tamika asked the superintendent, your team, to give detailed plan how to do that. I thought a little bit micromanagement here. There could be other programs we might have questions. Do we ask the superintendent and the team to give us detailed plan how to carry out this program? We will not do so. Even though this is a kind of probably unprecedented in Newton school history to have this school choice program, but still, I don't know if we have purview to ask school department to, plan to give such detailed plan to anticipate all those challenges. And that I think a little bit too much. We might be a little bit risky taking here to jump into this program, but at least we have the choice, right? If it does not work out well, we can stop next year. We have the right? If we feel there's too much work, or school department feels there's too much work to manage this program, school committee could recommend, or you guys could, tell school committee, we think it's not working well as we expected. And we can, deliberate on this program and whether we can stop it or not. So I'm willing to give full support to school department to carry out this. And even though there's some misinformation community, and I think I agree with Tamika in that sense, we have to do better messaging. And I think that analogy is pretty well. The school bus analogy helps some people to think through this, even though Paul mentioned that it's not totally perfect analogy, but still it's very nice analogy. And also, I assume that the school department already, Dr. Nolan already talked to other superintendents regarding this program. If there's some disadvantage, I assume you have been informed, and you would be willing to share with us if there's some disadvantage or some challenges. We should be informed. I think I would trust you will be open-minded and frank to share with us. So again, I want to give full support to this program. Thanks.
Thank you, An Ping. Did you?
I just wanted to give you one piece of information. So let's say we open the program for 1 year, this coming year. So we can then close school choice after that year if we decide we don't like it, but we keep the children we let in this year. I just want to be clear. Like you don't suddenly end school choice and everyone who came in school choice leaves. The people we let in stay.
Yeah.
Even if we close the program. And that's exactly, so I ran this program in the Natick schools for 10 years. And we closed it the last 3 years because we were overcrowded. So for 7 years we did it, for 3 we didn't. And that was the right decision at that time. So we were just, it was a different landscape, different folks aging into the system and out of the system. So you can curate it based on what happens in a year, but you can't undo the acceptances that you've already taken. So.
I recognize at the beginning of my remark, I say that this is a commitment we have to keep.
Yeah.
And also, we say that, but let's say again, we hope this about 200 students maximum, right, for school choice. And we hope at least half, if not more of those students were our school staff's kids.
Right.
Keep that in mind all the time. So we are not really increasing tremendous 200 students. We're probably increasing 100 students or even less.
I would just point out on Ping, the 200 number, if it was put forward as an example, but not a recommendation.
Okay.
Rajiv, go ahead.
And then
And then Amy.
All right, so want to react to a number of things. I want to start off just with, in terms of the presentation, and I know we don't, I personally have a strong aversion to scapegoating special education, but I do want to point out that except for out of district, any reimbursement coming in will not cover the full costs. That's not how it works. We've all been looking at the budget. We accept kids into this program. They are our kids. I absolutely get that. And if they have special needs that need to be served within NPS, we will be paying for that. There may be some level of benefit that or reimbursement that comes forward. It is not 100%. If it was, we would never be complaining about the cost of special ed. That's not how it works. I also want to be clear, this is a policy issue. I know we're talking about it in the context of the budget. It is not a budget issue. The policy issue, the last 2 years, and as far back as, at least as I've been tracking what the school committee does, it has been an automatic vote no. So if we think about our peer districts, any of our peer districts, not a single one does school choice. And the reason for that is if you actually think about how this will work, you open up 50, 100 positions. We're hearing it's at the elementary level. Fantastic. We have a bunch of middle school and high school students that are our students who are here because their parents or a parent is an employee of NPS. So if we're opening up on the elementary school, that's some small proportion of current students who we have because it's a benefit of employment through the NTA and our other unions. We open it up, and the reason that this is a risk is that if you look at our peer districts, and if you look at our neighboring districts, someone and I won't even name them, but in at least 3 of our neighboring districts who has the wherewithal to bring their kids into school in Newton see significant benefits in terms of the school district. So for no additional cost to them, 0, other than transportation, which they may be able to do anyway, their children, if they win the lottery, because there will be a lottery, would be enrolled in Newton Public Schools for the rest of their education, right? That's how it would work. So unlike, I mean, we're talking about 5,000. I'm not even going to get into the financials because Metco is in a completely different ballpark in terms of reimbursement and grants. But we're talking about $5,000 and hey, we filled to a better level a classroom at Ward or Underwood or Pierce or Williams. Fast forward a few years, we are facing overcrowding in our STEM courses at Newton North and Newton South. because those are our kids. They will continue until they graduate. And so you're taking on the risk of what happens when you get to that point. We paid a lot of money, the city paid a lot of money recently around enrollment. Enrollment is cyclical. It depends not so much on birth rates. It depends on who lives in our neighborhoods and how many of them have school-age kids. And that changes because people age out and families leave. This is a big risk. If we think we are smarter and more capable than every single peer district, more power to us, we're probably wrong if we think about it that way. If we think about a snapshot, that's the bus analogy, it's a snapshot. Today I have 20 empty seats, fantastic, let's fill them. It will cost practically nothing extra to fill those seats. Fast forward to a time when, hey, we have strapped capacity. Among the top 5 issues that we're dealing with in this budget is high school class sizes. Guess what? Those elementary school kids are going to get older, and they're going to need additional services, or they're going to need us to make sure that the class sizes aren't huge, which is already a challenge to deal with. We'll have to fix that. My projection, and this is more psychological than financial, is we are going to have an oversubscription because it's a fantastic benefit. You can live in Watertown, you can live in Boston, you can live in Waltham, have your kids go to school in Newton. We will probably be over-indexed with really smart kids and kids who need additional support, because those may be the areas where they have challenges in their current school district. Guess what that leads to? More support for special education and more kids who will want appropriately to take AP classes and STEM classes. So it's a patch that 5-10 years from now is likely to come back and bite us. So again, it's a policy issue. This is not a question of, hey, let's give it a shot and see how it works, because we will have those kids. They will be our responsibility. We will have to do our best to support them like we would for any other students. I don't think it's micromanagement. I think for a policy decision, we need input. Why isn't Wellesley doing this? Why isn't Brookline doing this? Why isn't Weston doing it? Why isn't Wayland doing it? Why do we think Lexington doesn't do this? Like, do we really think we have the answer and they don't know what they're doing? That's the question. So I've said this in multiple forums. Liam, I appreciate you bringing this forward. There's nothing new, right? And you acknowledge that. I appreciate Barry and Anping. You have a clear standpoint and you know you're going to vote for it. Fantastic. My career is spent advising companies on what they do and the decisions they make. This is one I would never advise anyone to do, just given the lack of control and risk over time, not in 1 year, but in 5 years or 10 years. So I've said this before, I've said it. This is probably my last chance to say it. I've had community members reach out. I will be sharing my opinion with them. And then, let's see where it goes.
Thank you, Rajiv. And I would say this is not your last chance to say it.
How many more presentations are we gonna? I thought this was the last one.
Well, if nothing else, I mean, there will have to be a motion put forth to either have school choice or not have school choice, and there will be discussion around that. So by definition, you have at least one more chance to say it. But I appreciate the views, certainly. Amy.
Well,
And then Paul, and then-
I don't know how I'm going to vote, so I'm just going to throw that out there. And I think that's what I'd like to do, is sort of speak to the tensions that I feel from both sides. So I'm part of a little school that could. Ward is tiny. I love it so much. And my daughter is in the 2nd grade, and there are 38 students in the 2nd grade. And I have two good pals who will not be returning to Ward in the second grade next year. And that's because their families have purchased houses far, far away. And it's possible that their houses will be reoccupied by families who have school-aged children. And it's probably not incredibly likely that those school-aged children will be the exact grade of the two students who are leaving. And in that grade of 38, there are 14 girls, and both who are leaving are girls. So Nell will be one of 12 next year. And I can see that opening up one seat in the second grade at Ward might yield like another Playdate pal, and it might not. But I don't think that it will cost the district a whole lot of money, nor do I think it will negatively impact my daughter's experience to go from a class of 16 to a class of 17. And so I can see like that is a real life example. And I don't think that that one second grader is going to be the reason that my daughter can't take AP statistics when she's a senior either, because as you said, enrollment is cyclical and school choice enrollment will follow that cycle. I have a first grade class at Ward, by which I mean some of the families who live here who live in Waltham right now also won't live here in 5 years. That's what I meant. I saw you furrow your brow. So I just wanted to qualify what I was saying. Yeah. Oh, I'm not done talking though. So the first graders, there's 21 of them. And that's a terrible number because there's one section. And we're not going to open up 5 seats in the first grade to justify adding a second section because a teacher costs $80,000 and there's not a whole lot of, that's a lot more than $5K per pupil, right? And so I can see that it's not going to impact us there, and yet I can still see that there's an impact overall that could be positive. I will say that completely just removing the special education conversation for a minute, that my lived experience as an educator is that students who transfer from other schools profoundly impact the community, even when there's just one of them. And so I work in a school of 900, and I can tell you about one student who's come from another district who has like really changed like the entire character of an entire grade. And that can be a really positive thing and a really challenging thing. And there's no way to put a price tag on it. And so I feel a lot of reservation there because there's a culture impact that isn't monetary. And I guess that does speak to your point, Rajiv, about policy as opposed to like a budgetary decision. The other thing that I think about is that this community has just weathered intense upheaval, and that while I think there's a tremendous amount of excitement and support in the changes that we anticipate happening in terms of elementary structure of the school day for the teachers and for the students, or, you know, increased staffing in STEM, I'm not sure that this is the right time to throw in like another new variable for our leaders. And this is probably like a rookie sentiment, but I really look forward to hearing public comment because I really want to know how people feel about this. And that's really going to inform like the average Newton person's threshold for change. That is definitely going to inform my decision about this year. But I think we do have to think creatively, and if we decide not to support it this year, I hope that we're leaving open the door for future years, because the 5-year cliff will be 4 years next year, will be 3 years the year after, and we do have to have a plan. And I do think we have to be creative, and that there are a lot of things that our peer districts do that we don't, and I'm so glad we don't. And there are a lot of things that we do that no one else does, and we already think we've figured it out better than they have. So I don't know that having a lack of peers yet in this journey means anything either way. So that's why I have no idea what to say yet, but I'm excited to decide later.
Thank you, Amy. Paul?
That was marvelous. Thank you. Really, really. So what's policy and what's budget? They start to overlap after a while. We have a lot of things we want to do that are part of a very thoughtful and expansive agenda on the part of our superintendent. And if there's insufficient money, we've made a policy decision not to do those things. So I always think there's an overlap between the two. I think, Rajiv, you brought out some really good ideas in terms of how you mitigate the risk of this. And I just have to think, and here I need Anna's comments and Liam's comments, that in deciding how many elementary students we would take in a given year, that we would look forward as to the enrollment of that cohort, the full cohort going through the high schools. So right now, for example, we have classes that are too big. But we also know that enrollment in the high schools is going to drop in a few years. And so that short-term problem we have right now will be mitigated just by enrollment. So I would have to hope and think, and again, I need Anna and Liam to comment on this, that in deciding on the numbers, they would look forward and they would say, here's how that cohort is likely to perform in terms of numbers over the years. In terms of broader public policy, Tamika, I think you and I disagree on this. This is the first time tonight we're disagreeing on anything. Did you notice that? All night long we were agreeing, which was lovely. The legislature has made a public policy determination that this is consistent with state educational policy. Putting that aside, we know we are limited in the number of METCO students that we can take right now. We know there's a bigger demand that could be served. Now, we can't guarantee that in our lottery, the winners will be people from Boston. Neither do we know whether they're going to come from Watertown or Waltham or whatever. But we do know that they will be people seeking a better educational opportunity for their children than they perceive they can get in their current districts. And to me, to the extent we can offer that in a way consistent with finances over time, risk mitigation and so on, I think that's good. So for example, right now we have an incredible special education program. We know that the existence of that program causes people with children with disabilities to move to Newton. If Casey were here, she would tell us that happens. Do we say we want to not offer a great special education program because it's increasing cost to the district to have children from outside of the district move here? No. I think most of us would say that's a terrific thing, that we offer the quality of the program that actually draws people into the community. To the extent that parents feel that school choice offers them similar opportunities to come to Newton, I think that's a good thing for the region. So anyway, I accept and I hear the objections. I again turn to Liam and Anna to say my expectation would be that in any given year's proposed allotment of slots to this program, you would give us the likely enrollment patterns for that cohort so that we can evaluate the risk of that. To me, that's a way of mitigating the risk. And to the extent that doing this produces additional funding for our district, that is a good public policy decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Emily, and I apologize, I should have recognized you because Paul already did speak, but
you want to respond to something before I speak? I'm fine with that, if you're okay with that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I just think there's a significant difference, and Paul, you obviously may have done this, and I can tell you I have, which is as co-chair of CPAC, I, on a at least monthly basis, sometimes more frequently, spoke with families outside of Newton who were considering a move to Newton. And invariably, right, they were looking for a situation that would provide the services to their child that the child needed and deserved. And that was never a question. The challenge for all of them was they were in other towns, generally towns that were more affordable, and they were figuring out how the heck they were going to come to Newton, find a home they could afford, and be in Newton so that their child could take advantage or benefit, could benefit from them being citizens in Newton, meaning buying a home here, paying Newton taxes, and having their child be an NPS student, right? I think that is completely different from the idea that you could be elsewhere. And with the lottery, you could then have your child in Newton. You're not paying Newton taxes. We're absolutely not going to get full reimbursement. And it's a situation where once they're in, like no matter what. And I fully understand that and fully think that's the right approach. But it's completely different from the families I have talked to over the years who have made real sacrifices to move to Newton from invariably a much more affordable town to do the best for their kids that they could. This is not that. This is you are somewhere, you are receiving services, you're going to roll the dice because you do want the best for your child, but you're not going to be paying Newton taxes. You're not going to be giving up space. You're not going to be giving up other things to be here. So I've had that experience many, many times of having discussions with people from other towns, other states, and especially, and pretty much with no exception, they've all said, wow, Newton is an expensive place to buy a home, and we will figure out some way to do it. This is not it.
Emily?
Kind of agree with what you're saying. I come at it from a different perspective. Probably unsurprisingly to anybody who's in this room, I'm not a supporter of school choice. I don't have anything particularly new or different to add. I agree with everything that Tamika said. I agree with most of what Rajiv said, other than just the last comment. I'm a little confused about that, but we can talk about that later. And I also thought that Amy's point about adding a new, just in terms of timing for now, adding a new variable in the midst of a time where there has been a ton of upheaval, I don't think this is the year to do it. So I think it's too risky. I think there's a risk from a financial perspective in terms of the special education costs. We have no idea how many people are actually going to be on the list who will, roll the dice to see if they can get into the district. I just think that there is a strong probability that the financial gain will be mitigated by cost of educating students. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Emily. Mayor Fuller?
To make a better decision on voting, I need more information. And let me give you some of the things that I would like to have. What it says in your presentation, Liam, that we could opt in on a limited basis determined by the school committee by school grade and number of spaces. what's the recommendation? What schools, which grades, how many kids? What are we talking about? And then if you could, please, I don't quite get it. Let's imagine we have the child of a teacher, I'm making this up, 2nd grade at Pierce. So we're going to, one of the hopes is maybe teachers' kids will actually get $5,000 per. So that means that for 3rd grade at Pierce, we're going to make a slot available for next year. But the teacher's kid is in the lottery but doesn't win it. And instead, Lisa's kid comes in. So we still have our teacher's kid in 3rd grade, plus the additional kid.
Yep, that's
The
a possibility.
math, how the heck are we figuring this out? How are we doing this to account for the hope that the teacher's kids wins the lottery and not the new families? I literally don't know how you make it work. Please talk to us. There's been a lot of talk about marginal costs or incremental costs. Tell us the numbers for each additional kid financially, but I want to understand it from a teacher's perspective. Having another kid in your classroom, I hope, means a whole bunch of additional attention to that kid, right? It's a unique child with unique needs that needs unique time from the teacher. Or we've heard we need more social workers. Maybe that kid needs some support from a social worker, we're short, or a guidance counselor, or a reading specialist, or the math specialist, or the ELL specialist. I've heard a lot, those are constrained resources that we worry about currently supporting our children. And it's not just the classroom teacher, we've built an amazing network of supports. So talk to me about the real marginal costs, not just the financial. So we need an additional Chromebook and some more paper and pencils, but somebody talked to me about, we've got 415 roughly Metco children in our system. And we understandably pay a lot of attention and add FTEs to think deeply how to make sure that those kids are part of our ecosystem. And it takes staff to pay attention to their individual needs. And you know what? We make sure they have the transportation to get to and from so that they can be on the sports team. We're now going to welcome these other kids in, not support them with any additional staff who are thinking uniquely about their needs, the way we do appropriately with our Metco families. And no transportation. We were thinking that was an advantage to us because we don't have the cost, but think about the disadvantage to the families. Metco, again, is so, I think, very thoughtful, takes children, I believe, exclusively in kindergarten or 1st grade. Maybe it's also 2nd, but I think it's K and 1. So that when new kids are starting, they're part of the new kids and they're all coming in at the same time. It's really different starting as from outside of Newton in the 4th grade or 7th grade or 9th grade. Just how are we going to do this? Tell us more. Um, and model it out. If we're taking X kids in these grades and we have them in our school all the way through 12th, by the way, do we also keep them for, I call them grades 13, 14, 15, and 16? Are they part of that too? Because certain kids we keep all the way till they're age 22. Are they in that?
They are, but can you clear up the misconception that there is not total sped reimbursement for the cost? And it's also cost shared with the sending district?
Maybe can we let Mayor Fuller finish
Yeah.
her comments?
I just want to make sure that that
That's
myth
right.
does not persist, which this is her question there.
Well, I don't think I had asked that.
No, but
question,
I heard it here.
but
and
I
then
did
it
hear
got
it.
picked
I
up
did
here.
hear it there.
So if they go to 18 to 22, there are cost sharing and total cost reimbursements for all of those pieces. So I just want to be clear, we've shared a spreadsheet of that total reimbursement.
Okay, useful to clarify, is it 100%? There's also the confidence in our long-term enrollment numbers, which I think is a lot of this. We are nervous enough about it that now when we plan new buildings, we all plan ahead of time and put in the utility connections and stuff so that we can add 4 classrooms, for example, over at a Lincoln Elliott or a Countryside. We know that year by year, Katie does an amazing job. Each individual year we can forecast, but we're not necessarily great at figuring out 10 years from now what is going to be our enrollment. Even the McKibben study, their time frame was shorter. So we are embracing these children for a long time, a decade or more. And it's amazing that we haven't heard from the other schools who have implemented this. Thankfully, Dr. Nolan has a lot of experience, but I'm not sure we've even heard from Dr. Nolan what were the pros and cons and lessons learned, but from other districts as well. Please fill us in. And I would not discount what Amy brought up about the added variable. You really want to do this vote in the next month after the heck of the year that we've been through, when there's so much. And I would also say, let's pretend we're doing 50 kids. 50 kids, that's a lot of kids. That's $250,000. You really want to own the 50 kids for $250,000 out of our $278 million. What's our budget next year? $278 million. We're going to take on these questions, these issues, these concerns. For that reason, we better have a much better reason than that. And one last question. If we were going to add kids, just answer this question. What would we add? Why wouldn't we add Metco kids? Why do school choice? I guess it's the hope that we get the teachers' kids lotteried in.
So Metco's been capped statewide.
Got it.
It's been capped.
That's a
And I
good
also
answer.
just want to, sorry to disillusion you all, but Metco was sued and Metco cannot be a race-based program anymore either. So I just want to be clear. In addition, this year, Metco will be enacting for the FY26 budget expectations that all Metco resources will go towards Metco students only and will no longer be doing the things you just described. So I just want to make sure we're all up to date. Like the positions, the 7 positions that go to our budget for all children, whether regardless or not. So it's their funding schedule and their expectations due to an audit is also changing.
How many full-time Metco staff do we have that are only focusing on Metco kids?
It's like 0.2 to 0.5 per building of an
Right, so
FTE.
that we've got 10
Mhm.
to 12 full-time Metco staff who only focus on Metco
They're not
kids.
full-time, but yeah.
I think it's a total, so we have a full-time director and assistant, and then I think the full-time equivalency is about almost 7 FTE
So we've got
counselors.
9 or 10 faculty to think or educators to think about those 415. We're going to have 0 for the school choice.
But it's actually more complicated than that because these are 1.0 positions that are 0.3 funded through Metco funding. So they're one whole adult thinking about an entire building and prioritizing Boston resident students as well. And that won't be happening in future years due to the audit.
Although, just clarify it one more time. I think, did Liam, how many staff members will we have, I'll say, once it's implemented in FY '26, that will be full-time focused on, at full-time equivalents, FTEs, focused on our Metco students?
So again, we've got the council, I mean, again, unless there's a change, we have a full-time director, we have a full-time assistant, and then we've got a number of partial folks
Right.
that I believe make up about 7 FTE in our schools. And then in addition to that, that Dr. Nolan was saying was we also fund what we call a teacher credit. They're not directly, they're basically 7 FTE or about $750,000. We take what we call a teacher credit. And I think that's a question that we need to make sure, is that allowable expense in the Metco grant? Those are students are certainly in front of our teachers, and we want to make sure that that's something that's allowed.
I'm still trying to reconcile what Amy is saying and that you're saying, and I'm not sure which is.
I'm not disagreeing with you at all.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that right now, 0.3 of a position in NPS is funded through Metco funding. And if it no longer is, then Anna has to decide if the district can fund it ourselves or if that's a 0.3 person. You know
Yes,
what I'm saying?
yes.
So
but
like
there's
they're not
0.3
guaranteed people.
0.3 times 22 schools is roughly 7 FTEs plus the 2 district, how the superintendent. So I think there's 9 FTEs that are exclusively focusing on Metco students. Sometimes they're the 0.3. is
Yeah,
doing
that's the
something else,
problem. They're
but
not
I
focusing,
understand.
and so they will be subject to scrutiny by Metco.
I get it,
Yeah.
but it's still 9 FTEs for our 415 Metco students. And
This year. Yeah.
Well, even next year, or in 26, they just have to only focus on the Metco students.
I feel like we're getting a little off topic here from our school choice.
Right, but
discussion.
I just want to, so we can't expand Metco, which is really important to understand. And thank you for that. But kids who are coming from outside of Newton may need special support too. I get why our Metco families and children need it and deserve it. And what's different about the other kids who are coming?
Chris,
Thank
can
you.
can I quick follow-up question? Not really follow-up. I think Mayor mentioned a core question, which also in my mind, how can we guarantee our school staff kids would have that slot? And I do want to hear from, and to explain that. If we cannot guarantee, we can think wonderfully, we open 150 slots and we have 140 staff kids will fill in that. Sounds like we haven't done anything more and we get money. But if we cannot guarantee, then I would change my mind, let's be honest. So, and I do want to hear very concrete what we can do to guarantee that, because that's also been my question. I forgot to mention that in my remarks.
So
Go ahead.
I just want to be clear, you can't, in a lottery, you can guarantee nothing. But statistically, given the number of seats and the grade levels that we would open, it would be likely that some monies would be recouped by staff, students.
What's your best scenario in that case?
It's a lottery on Ping, so it's literally,
140, about 130 to 140 staff kids. How many kids we can
I
get
have
in?
no idea.
Yeah.
It's a lottery.
I think on Ping, I mean, it becomes simple probability of number of staff students eligible for a particular seat relative to the entire applicant pool for that individual seat. If you wanted to
We
think,
don't know the total applicant. pool.
Right.
so go ahead.
In that sense, I think then you guys have to be honest in your presentation. Even you throw out the numbers there, but if you now saying this lottery, this random, there's no guarantee, then this could not be a major kind of factor in selling the school choice program. I have to be
On
honest.
Ping, I think that point has been addressed a number of times by the presentations and the workshops we've had, that it is a lottery system and staff children will go into the pool of the lottery just as any other external applicant would. And I don't think there's been any misdirection on that point by the administration.
Those numbers highlighted in the question and answers and give people impression. We could have some way to.
This is why we didn't put out any numbers, because we didn't want to imply that there would be a guarantee of any numbers.
I think for
So,
me, if
yeah.
I could address on Ping's point, you have to be willing to accept that whatever number is put out is those seats are filled by non-teacher students. If you are willing to accept that premise, then any number of staff children who happen to, by a totally random state required randomized lottery process, then those numbers will draw down. But if you have to start from a framework of, if we open up 200 seats, we have to be willing to say 200 students will come from Waltham, Boston, wherever, Watertown, whatever sending district they're coming from, provided that they transport their child themselves as a base premise.
So let me share my thoughts, which I think will address some of these issues, but, probably a couple other things as well. So number one, and I know we talked about this before in the difference between elementary and high school. The way I see this is the marginal cost of adding a student to that classroom of 13 kids where, we have space, and the marginal cost really is relatively low. Obviously, the marginal cost increases to the extent that student has special needs of any variety. Some of those, if the student's coming in with an IEP, obviously we will be reimbursed for some portion of that according to the DESE's formulas. If it's something that occurs along the way, then we're not, and that's part of thinking through what the risk is. Once you get to high school, it becomes total level funded. There's no benefit, except to the extent that it's a staff member's kid who would be part of the status quo student body. And then we're getting the $5,000. And if there's an IEP services attached, money attached to that as well. But, I think of it simply as we model very linearly in high school of, you have 20 new kids, that equals a new teacher. 20 new kids is $100,000 equals roughly the cost of a teacher. And it's sort of a wash the economics are sort of a wash once you get to the point of high school. I think, we've already discussed that, probably doesn't make sense. And I don't know, you can tell me if you disagree. I think that the committee sort of probably came to that conclusion already of, we wouldn't open this up at the high school level because our high schools are full right now. Whereas, we do have space in some of our elementary schools. And, from that perspective, like, look, this really, it is about money. And you know, I think, you know, you can make whatever public policy arguments you want, but public policy requires funding to enact it. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with saying our primary, you know, incentive here is money. I don't see a problem with that. I do think you know, I would like us to, or I guess I wish there's really no looking forward on it. I wish the 200 number was never put out, because I think that's scared the hell out of a lot of people to say, like, wow, that sounds like a lot. What are we going to do and how are we going to manage that? And, you know, it's my opinion, and I'm guessing I'm not alone in this, that if we were to enact school choice for next year, it would be a number far less than 200. That's my guess. That's my belief personally, but I think it's my guess as well, that we would want to start small, see how this works, figure it out, wear it on for size for a little bit, decide if it's something we can expand. Maybe it's something that does turn out to you know, not work out the way we thought, and then, you know, okay, I'll throw out a much lower number, 20 students, and I'm not making a recommendation on that, but then we have 20 students that we have to care for through the system, and that's a much more manageable endeavor than 200 students. So, I mean, I think that's, you know, that's part of the, I think that's part of the math here, is not just do we do this or not, but at what size would we be comfortable doing it if we do it. In my thinking, you know, I very much agree with Rajiv's comments that I do think the population would skew towards kids with some form of special needs and towards kids who are really high achievers, where their families or that student believes they're not getting what they need in their current district. And, you know, Newton would be able to provide that better. Just from an incentives perspective, I think there's less incentive for the family of the, I'm a B, you know, student who's, you know, middle of the pack kind of thing. And, you know, I'm happy in my schools, and, you know, why are you going to go through this? You know, it's a big deal to go and have to send your kid to a different district and make that move, and, you know, the social adjustment, and to deal with the transportation, everything. So, you know, I could see some, you know, perhaps some schools coming from other districts that we aren't talking about, you know, peer districts, where, you know, perhaps there's a bullying issue or something like that. And, you know, it's an out for a student like that. So I think you would have some of that in the mix as well. You know, I think this is a somewhat figure-outable thing. I know that's not particularly good English, but it's, you know, the big question, and the thing that I think, and I've been bugging Liam about this ever since this discussion came up, of how do we get some confidence around what the applicant pool looks like. And, you know, we had the discussion in our workshop on this, and it's just, there's no good comparable district to say that, you know, you have the same population density and things that are around Newton. You know, there's districts out in the western part of the state that do it. You know, I mean, Natick might be one of the closest looking districts that's done it. And so there's not a, you know, we thought about charter schools, and we thought about, you know, how many seats, you know, how over subscribed are those lotteries, and Metco and things like that as proxies. And I just don't know that there's going to be a great level of confidence we'll ever get on what that applicant pool looks like. But, you know, that doesn't mean you can't put reasonable bookends around this thing to say, okay, we're going to open this up at elementary, and it's going to be X number of students, and we know exactly how many staff kids will be eligible for that lottery. And here's, you know, what we think the range of applicant pools might look like. And for any given scenario, it's just simple math at that point. This is the lottery. There's, you know, 4 kids for every seat, and one of those kids is a staff kid. You put that over, you know, a reasonable population size, that's going to be, you should expect 25% of your staff kids to get selected. That's the simple math. There's no guarantee of that. It could be 0 kids. It could be 100% of the kids in extreme tail scenarios, which are highly, highly unlikely. But you can get to a reasonable expectation because you're literally talking coin flips at that point in time. So I do think we can, to some of your questions, Marifu, I do think we can figure some of this stuff out and at least come up with, these are some reasonable scenarios to think about. And, you know, I've kind of been working through some of that. I want to catch up with Liam on some of that and, you know, and Katie perhaps, and go through this. And you have to think through what is enrollment going to look like a couple years, 4, 5, 10 years down the road when that first grader is an 11th grader. And, I think there's a reasonable baseline assumption though, that our high school enrollment will be falling over the next couple years. And, that it can be a manageable thing. But again, I think it's, my mind is not entirely made up on this. If you made me say it, I had to vote one way or another today, I'd be like, yeah, let's do it, but let's do it small. Let's do it really small to start with, until we've done that work to figure it out, or we've had the experience to see how it actually works. So
Chris, can I just quickly say that?
Yes.
You ask good questions, and just said, if I understand clearly, Natick went through this 7 years, so she had a first-hand experience. I do want to hear how she learned. I assume that Natick has the same situation. The staff could, if they do not live in Natick, they could. Oh, you don't have that kind of. Okay, then you cannot compare. Otherwise, Natick will be a good example to show us how many school staff kids could have used that program.
You could compare, because again, if you were, it's not about determining how how many times the coin came up heads versus tails. It's what does the applicant pool look like? If you could accurately predict the applicant pool, then you could say with X% confidence, mathematically speaking, you should, there's a 2/3 probability, there's a 95% probability that you're going to get this many staff kids selected in the lottery. It's literally just probability at that point in time.
At this time, we don't have the
question
reliable
is,
data to
what
any
is
kind
the
of.
population size you're dealing with?
And that's an X factor for me too. We had 50 applicants a year in Natick. We got the data from Shrewsbury, right? They were opening 30 slots. They had
I think
50 applicants. or-
yeah, it was about 1.8 times the total applicants, so almost double there. So if they had 30, I think they got 55 or so, applicants in total for looking for 30 open spots, something like that.
But I mean, as we discussed at that time, like the population density matters so much because it's, the neighboring district is 20 minutes away.
Yeah, Worcester was the big draw for Shrewsbury at that point. Yeah.
So, look, I think this was a good discussion tonight. I think there was, there's clearly some folks in favor of it, clearly some folks against it. I would encourage folks on both sides of that to, at least recognize there is a benefit to this and there is risks to doing this. Sure. And, to keep an open mind as we continue to go through this process, there is going to be a public hearing. Amy will get all her input from so, this is there's very good cause for Dr. Nolan to come forward with this. We do have to find incremental revenue. We do have to find efficiencies in this system. That is part of the deal we made. And, this is one avenue to do that. It may or may not be the right avenue, but I encourage us to keep an open mind as we continue through this process. With that, Tamika, go ahead.
So I appreciate that perspective. I think you're right in terms of you have to explore and you have to be creative. You have to find funds where you find them and create them where you can create them. Got it. No disagreement there. What I will disagree on, and I'm not interested in playing the rebuttal game, so I apologize if it feels like a rebuttal. I don't intend it to be that way, but it's simply a fact that we are considering this and we all hear things and need to kind of have our conceptualized way of framing them in the moment, in the heat of our discussion. So one thing you said there is nothing wrong with money being a primary incentive for doing this. I would suggest that that's not the way we do anything here in Newton. We don't look at money as the primary objective for anything. If that was the case, Amy's lovely little school would have been a very simple decision that it's too small, financially speaking, we're not going to do it. We can't do it. We don't look at things that way. We think instead broadly, more holistically, better for our children, better for the families, better for our residents in our community. And we say, what is best for their needs educationally? What is going to make it so that the students here are having a wonderful, thorough, rich, and vibrant experience, not just for today, but for years to come? We don't think of things in terms of just a rote calculation of what costs what and how do we save money. We do that in conjunction with all those other things. So that's the one kind of minor correction that I would make. And again, it is not meant to be rebuttal. It's more just part of our conversation. Thank you for recognizing.
Yep. Well, it did feel like a rebuttal.
I'm sorry. Lawyer.
In fairness, it was sort of a rebuttal to my sort of rebuttal to what you said. So, it's okay.
You're doing a great job, everyone. You're doing a great job.
And
Not sorry.
no. And I want to be clear on what I said is that it is fine that we are our primary incentive is money. It doesn't mean we ignore all those other things you talked about. And if we can have incremental funds with really no detraction from student experience or whatever, and then the cost benefit makes sense. It may be that the cost benefit doesn't make sense, but I think to say that money isn't our primary variable for much of what we do doesn't mean money isn't a variable for what we do. No more rebuttals.
Anna and Liam had a correction to something I said. I wanted to make sure we address that.
I just want to go back to the special ed spreadsheet and make sure everybody understands what the cost reimbursement is and the cost sharing with sending districts.
Sure. So on the packet has got this DESI cost calculator. I've looked at this and I've looked at this with Amanda Collins and Rajiv. I think you made the comment that there will be cost. It's hard for me to tell you that every reimbursed dollar, every dollar that we spend will be reimbursed. They give a dollar per hour cost, and some of these look like that they would be close to the ranges of what we're paying out. There are areas, I think, particularly on the lower scale, that are below what we're paying out. So I think Rajiv's comment is that we would get, from my perspective, it's a little bit of both. We would get, a significant amount back of the payment we would have. I don't see, looking at this, I can't say we would get 100%. Of those costs back to us.
Right. And so I looked at that in the context of our newly signed contract.
Yeah.
Right. And we are in a different place than what DESI has.
Correct. Yes.
And which I'm happy about, especially when it comes to where we landed with Unit C and other staff. But it's not 100%. Also, my understanding is that the student comes in and is later at some point in their tenure within NPS requires an IEP. That's us. Correct. It's not the sending district because they didn't come here with an IEP. And I can tell you from knowing and working with many special education families, a tiny proportion start out with their kids on an IEP at the beginning of elementary school. There really a lot of diagnosis and a lot of supports determined to be required later on. I actually know a family whose kid went undiagnosed with the need for a fair amount of support until junior year of high school at Newton North. And it was shock to them because they hadn't been navigating the system. But those would be our kids, is kind of my point.
Is that true? That qualifying for an IEP after admission via school choice doesn't, no reimbursement?
I don't have that experience from dealing with this. It's treated the same, but I can certainly ask Desi again.
Is the question, so if it's a school choice student and they incur special education costs, again, we would submit for reimbursement. as we
Anytime.
would-
Regardless of when they
Regardless of
qualify.
when they
Right.
qualified. So
Yeah.
if they came in qualified, we'd reimburse in the first year. If it was 6 years after they came in, we would be completing a form like this and putting in for those costs that would be, one of the pieces, again, I think I've talked about this before. This isn't, it does not require the circuit breaker where you need to be almost above $50,000 for it to trip in. So it's really starting from kind of $1 as they start reimbursing you. I think as Rajiv and I were saying, our costs and the DESI costs, our costs are going to be higher, I think, than the reimbursement rate that they're putting in there. So I hope that answers that question in terms of when they come
Sorry,
in.
My understanding is different. My understanding was that if any supports are determined to be required here, so essentially what we're saying is if it's anything that gets to the level of an IEP, we would get partial reimbursement based on
Yes.
DESI.
Yeah.
And if it's additional support, as Mayor Fuller had mentioned, from reading specialists, math specialists, etc., if they're not on an IEP, I don't think we get reimbursement for that.
No, that's a general education service.
And also to Chris's point around high school being a wash, it's a wash for 20 students per teacher, but not for guidance counselors, specialists, coaches, CTE, advisors, etc. Thank you.
Yeah, and what you're talking about, just in terms of that uncertainty of those future costs and et cetera, it kind of makes me just realize there's a real asymmetry here of the benefits of this. It's $5,000 per student per year, for as long as they're here. It's a very known, concrete, and capped thing. You're not going to get paid more than, well, you will for a special education kid, but that's not going to, your best case scenario, financially speaking, is you're going to get $5,000 for a student who's already here that would be educating anyway, which is a staff child. For another student, it's going to be $5,000 versus the marginal cost. It's known, and it's a limited upside. The downside, so to speak, and I don't want to speak pejoratively downside on, but I'm saying financially, the downside is, man, you get kids with real severe special needs that we've got to deal with that, are going to be a strain on the budget. And it's a very unknowable and, much less limited thing. And so I think, it's human nature that we all think about those things differently and react to them differently. They have a different, there's a risk aversion sort of concept, I think, that's in all of us that makes us weigh those things differently. So maybe that's just something to think about as we continue to go through this. All right. Any other? Okay.
Chris, just quickly, Leon, you mentioned the Shrewsbury,
Yeah.
which is considered as very good school district in Worcester area. And I think if we have more data from Shrewsbury, I don't know how long Shrewsbury has adopted this school choice program. Do you happen to know? And if a little bit longitudinal study to see what's impact, because that will give us some kind of real sense,
So I can answer this for you right now, because I gave you the article about it already. They opened it for 2 years to do 30 seats to fill a budget deficit, and then they've closed it. So in those, right, Liam, 2
Yes.
years, they received 55 or 1.8 more applicants than they had seats.
And they closed because they had no longer had any open seats, or they
No,
realized too much.
Because their budget rebounded and they no longer needed to take additional students to address the budget deficit.
2 years.
It was
Thanks.
completely a money
Yeah.
moment.
Can I just back up with, Chris mentioned that he and Liam are brainstorming about how to perhaps put forward a possible model that Newton would experience. I will mention that Newton is right, our location is amazing. Lots of people who are driving an hour to get to work because they found housing that's more affordable, drive through Newton or near Newton to get into jobs in Boston. And we have an excellent school system with an excellent reputation. And people are smart and people love their children and will put their children's needs in front of almost anything they do. If we open up school choice, my prediction is that there will be a ton of interest in this, and the idea that there'll be a lot of opportunity for the children of our school teachers, I'm guessing, is limited. Location, location, reputation, reputation.
Okay, thank you. No other comments for adjourn.
Way to read the room. Okay, so I will have the answers to the Ruth Ann questions for the 24th then, the school choice. Is that sufficient? Well, I mean, that, you want it before that? Maybe before the hearing? We'll have to see. Okay, because I am trying to give people some vacation.